Chapter 5388. In short, Duan Muyu's opening method was wrong. So the current situation was basically the same as when her clothes exploded before. If it was someone else, even if it was a master of the yuanying stage, Duan Muyu would definitely die at this moment. Fortunately, there was a profound ascending stage primordial spirit sitting behind her. In the small Jianghu of the ancient times, this was almost the existence of a master of the spiritual awareness. More importantly, this guy knew the entire refining process of the spiritual awareness grass. After all, since he came to the small ancient world, Lenny had to take a bite of the spiritual awareness grass almost every day to assist in his cultivation. In the first month, he still felt unbearable pain, but by now, he had basically become accustomed to it. He was probably the first weirdo in history to eat the spiritual awareness grass as a daily snack. Pain was pain, but in his eyes, this thing was similar to coffee. Apart from the pain, it was quite fragrant and refreshing. Lenny unsurprisingly took over the turbulent and spectacular tide of pain for Duan Muyu. But he did not directly erase it for her. That way, there would be no effect of refining the spiritual awareness. He just suppressed it to a certain extent rhythmically, and then released it little by little. In this way, it was within the range of Duan Muyu's tolerance, and at the same time, it could maximize the effect of refining the spiritual awareness. In this way, another day and night passed, and Duan Muyu struggled out of the endless sea of pain. It was just one day. This time was far from long for others, and it was not worth mentioning for cultivators who had been in seclusion for decades. But if they were in Duan Muyu's situation, it would definitely be extremely long, because this was really like a year. The amazing perseverance that Duan Muyu showed on this day, even Lenny couldn't help but be surprised. Although he had suppressed the tide of pain, the total amount of half of the spiritual awareness grass was still there. Even if it was released in a controlled manner, the degree of pain was still far above the usual. After all, Duan Muyu had only used one day to deal with the pain that others would need at least half a month to endure. She was able to do it without a sound, and Lenny couldn't help but give her a thumbs up. Young lady, you really are a man. Phew. Like a marathon that had finally come to the finish line, Duan Muyu let out a long sigh of relief. At this time, her entire body had been soaked in sweat countless times, and her image had been completely thrown to the back of her mind. Her tense spirit for the whole day relaxed a little, and her whole body fell back. Lenny was stunned. Duan Muyu was too tired to care about his image, but he was not tired at all. Especially in the past few days, he had been openly admiring Duan Muyu's clean and beautiful back. It was inevitable that some charming thoughts would arise in his heart, but he had been very good at restraining himself. But now, Duan Muyu suddenly fell backward and directly crashed into his arms. Lenny didn't even have a chance to react. He then stared blankly at the beautiful scenery in front of him. Previously he could only see his back, but now he could even see his front clearly. Pink. This thought flashed across Lin Yi's mind, and then he met Duan Muyu's eyes. Ah! Duan Muyu finally came to her senses at this moment. She quickly covered her chest and sat up again. She hurriedly tried to find clothes to cover her embarrassment. Unfortunately, the clothes on the ground had already been torn to pieces, and this place was the confinement room, not her boudoir. Naturally, there would be no clothes to change into. For a moment, she was like a headless fly and didn't know what to do. Lenny was also very embarrassed. It was fine if Duan Muyu didn't move. He couldn't see too much. At most, he could only see her back. Now that she moved, it was even more beautiful, and he didn't know where to put his eyes. This kind of charming awkwardness didn't last long, because Lenny suddenly reminded, "Hurry up and hide. Someone is coming outside." Duan Muyu was stunned for a moment. This room was shrouded by the black water array. Logically speaking, it was impossible for anyone trapped in it to perceive the situation outside, because divine sense couldn't explore at all. But based on the absolute trust established before, she subconsciously reacted and hid on the bed, and covered herself tightly with the quilt. In fact, she should have done this when she was helpless just now. But for some reason, she actually froze. Thinking about it, it was very strange. Sure enough, As soon as Duan Muyu hid under the quilt, the iron door was opened, and the person who came was still Chiu Mingchong. Chiu Mingchong stood at the door and was about to speak, but when he glanced at it he was stunned. From his angle, although he couldn't see every corner of the room, he could still see it clearly. He clearly saw that Duan Muyu was actually on the bed at this moment. A man and a woman were sharing a room. Although Leni was still sitting on the side, Duan Muyu actually ran to the bed. Anyone could imagine what had happened, not to mention a guy with a rich imagination like Chiu Mingchong. Here's the chance. Chiu Mingchong's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't insist on this matter. This time he didn't come to watch the show. Bing Wuqing will be here soon. Before that, I would like to give you a word of advice. I hope you can weigh what you should and shouldn't say. Again, as long as you can help Bing Wuqing hand over the God Knowledge Grass, you will be an honored guest of our Yiling sect. Everything will be negotiable, Chiu Mingchong reminded. Sure, Leni agreed readily. A wise man submits to circumstances. Then we'll see your performance next. Chiu Mingchong was very satisfied with Lin Yi's attitude. He had no enmity with Lin Yi in the past, and the only thing he wanted was the God Knowledge Grass. As long as Lin Yi was sensible enough to help him trick the God Knowledge Grass from Bing Wuqing, he had no intention of continuing to make things difficult for him. Chiu Mingchong left, but before he left, he deliberately glanced at the bed. Although he still couldn't see anything, his gaze was meaningful. That guy's eyes are strange. Don't tell me he's taken a fancy to you? Lin Yi turned to Duan Muyu on the bed and said, Huh? Duan Muyu was stunned. Then, she shook her head with a strange expression and said, That can't be. I don't have any private contact with him. And a while ago, the higher-ups were discussing. Discussing what? Lin Yi saw her hesitant expression and couldn't help but feel a little strange. This girl had always been forthright and rarely hesitated. Chapter 5389. Yes, as many as you want here. Only then did Lin Yi remember that there was still a pile of women's clothes in his jade pendant space. He had already given a set to Duan Muyu during the primeval trial last time. He was distracted just now and did not remember this. After taking the clothes from Lin Yi, Duan Muyu did not get out of the quilt. Instead, she looked at Lin Yi with a strange expression and said, You didn't do it on purpose, did you? Of course not, you're thinking too much. Lin Yi suddenly sweated. Although Duan Muyu's appearance was indeed quite pleasing to the eye, he really did not think of this. Is that so? Duan Muyu was skeptical, but there was no unhappy expression on her face. After putting on the clothes quickly, she immediately returned to her usual elegant and neat manner. It seemed that she did not take the previous embarrassment to heart at all. Of course, how can an honest person like me do such a wretched thing? After all, we've gone through life and death together. It's not like you don't know this. Lin Yi's words were justified, but looking at Duan Muyu, who looked like a new urban white-collar worker, he could not help but think of her naked appearance, and he felt a little guilty. Forget it. Seeing that you've given me so many supreme-grade gold cores, I'll just look at them. It's nothing anyway. Duan Muyu once again showed her forthright side. Lin Yi was speechless. After coming out of the confinement room, Chiu Mingchong did not lead the way for Bing Wuqing, who was waiting in the reception room. Instead, he went straight to the God Leaf Hall. This was the most core and authoritative place in the entire Yiling sect. It was where the sect leader and a group of high-level elders gathered, and all orders were issued from. At this time, the sect leader Yi Qingcheng and other high-level elders were all present. When they saw Chiu Mingchong register and enter, they all showed some anticipation. Did you get the divine consciousness grass? Master, not yet. Chiu Mingchong respectfully performed a disciple's salute. Although Duan Muyu had surpassed him, his position in the sect was not low. However, his position in the sect was not low. After all, he was the personal disciple of the sect master, Yi Qingcheng. Then why don't you hurry over and keep an eye on him? Yi Qingcheng frowned. The spiritual awareness grass was an absolutely fatal temptation for any gold core stage master. Even if he was already the head of a sect, even if he was only one step away from the Yuanying stage, he still coveted it. If there was no chance at all, then it was fine. Now that it was within his reach, He couldn't help but feel a little anxious. The other high-level elders were also urging him on. If they could get their hands on the God-knowledge grass from Duanmu Yu and Bing Wuqing this time, Yi Qingqing would definitely get the lion's share, but they would definitely get a share as well. If they couldn't get the meat, they should at least get some soup. Yes. However, this disciple just discovered something and felt that it was necessary to report it to Master and the elders. Qiu Mingchong said. What could be more important than the divine sense grass? Yi Qingqing and the other elders frowned. When I went to talk to Linny just now, I found eldest senior sister hiding under the blanket, and there were pieces of her clothes all over the floor. It seems like she went too far, Qiu Mingchong said with ulterior motives. Outrageous. The group of high-level elders immediately started cursing when they heard this. As the eldest senior sister of the sect, how can she be so shameless and openly have an affair with a man from another sect in the restricted area? Where is the image of our Yiling sect? What a scandal! Yi Qingqing was even more enraged. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that he was trying to make a fuss. This was not surprising, because although Duanmu Yu was recognized as the eldest senior sister of the sect, she was not his disciple. There was nothing he could do about it. Who asked Qiu Mingchong to not live up to expectations? Letting Duanmu Yu take the position of the eldest senior sister of the sect was somewhat embarrassing for the sect master, Yi Qingqing. He could not show it on the surface, but he still bore a grudge in his heart. Otherwise, he would not have listened to Qiu Mingchong's slanderous words and strongly advocated for Duanmu Yu to hand over the spiritual awareness grass. If this matter really spread out, it would be very embarrassing, but he did not care. It was a good opportunity to suppress Duanmu Yu. Now Duanmu Yu actually had an affair with an outsider. That was even more terrible, and it would ruin the sect's reputation. Directly removing her status as the eldest senior sister was already a light punishment. This was exactly what Qiu Mingchong wanted. He deliberately said this at this juncture in order to make Yi Qingqing and the other high-level elders remove Duanmu Yu from the position of the eldest senior sister. This way, he would naturally be able to become the eldest senior brother of the sect. His strength at the peak late foundation establishment was a little weaker, but he was still the personal disciple of the sect master, Yi Qingqing. Moreover, there were not many disciples in the Yiling sect to begin with. Apart from Duanmu Yu, no one could be above him, so it was only natural for him to be promoted. Everyone was filled with righteous indignation. Qiu Mingchong thought that his master would definitely go along with his wishes, but in the end, he heard Yi Qingqing say, "This matter concerns the image of our Yiling sect, so we have to investigate it. However, we should suppress it for now and discuss it after they hand over the spiritual awareness grass." Huh! Qiu Mingchong was stunned and could not help but feel disappointed. Duanmu Yu would be severely punished for doing such a thing sooner or later. But in his opinion, the result of discussing it now and later was likely to be very different. At this time, Duanmu Yu was almost standing on the opposite side of all the high-level elders of the sect. Once she was severely punished, her position as the eldest senior sister would definitely be lost, and there might even be a heavier punishment that would make her unable to rise again. However, if they discussed it later, it would be hard to say if she really handed over the spiritual awareness grass. At that time, for the sake of the spiritual awareness grass, the high-level elders of the sect, including his master Yi Qingqing, would definitely be too embarrassed to kill her. If they were to go easy on her, maybe Duanmu Yu would be able to get away with it. Unfortunately, Qiu Mingchong had no right to speak on this occasion. Yi Qingqing had the final say. After all, for Yi Qingqing and the high-level elders of the other sects, punishing Duanmu Yu was only a small matter. The spiritual awareness grass was the most important thing. If Duanmu Yu was forced to completely give up and resist stubbornly because of this matter, it would not be worth it. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and go. Yi Qingqing glared at him. Yes. Qiu Mingchong did not dare to delay and obediently retreated. Soon, Bing Wuqing arrived at the confinement room under Qiu Mingchong's guidance. The iron door opened, and Bing Wuqing could not help but frown slightly as she felt the faint fluctuations of the array in front of her. Chapter 5390. He was very sure that no formation could trap Lin Yi, at least not in the primordial underworld. Since it was Lin Yi who asked her to enter, Bing Wuqing naturally did not hesitate and immediately stepped in. All right, since he's here, the three of you can have a good talk. I hope there'll be good news when I come back later. Of course, it'll be good news for you too. Otherwise, you'll be imprisoned in this dark place for the rest of your lives. I'm sure it'll be very frustrating, right? Qiu Mingcheng laughed, closed the iron door, and left. Boss, what's going on? Bing Wuqing nodded slightly at Duan Muyu, who was beside her, as a form of greeting, and asked directly. Lin Yi's letter to him did not mention the specific situation. He only asked him to come over, and he was still confused until now. Duan Muyu couldn't help but look at Lin Yi in surprise when she heard this tone. Previously, during the primordial trials, she did see that there should be some tacit understanding and connection between the two, but she didn't expect it to be this kind of relationship. From this tone, Bing Wuqing was clearly like Wu Qintian and the others, becoming a loyal subordinate of Lin Yi. Others might not be much, but Bing Wuqing was a famous super genius in the entire primordial underworld. She had always been arrogant and rarely looked others in the eye. Now she was actually willing to submit to Lin Yi. This was really a little embarrassing. However, when she remembered that the other party was Lin Yi, after the shock, Duan Muyu felt that this matter was reasonable. Back in the primordial trials, even a legendary existence like Jiuying was frightened by Lin Yi. As long as he wanted to, subduing Bing Wuqing was naturally a piece of cake. Lin Yi told the whole story in a few words. After listening, Bing Wuqing had a strange expression on her face. She carefully looked at Lin Yi and Duan Muyu, and finally came to a conclusion. I didn't know that the higher-ups of the Yiling sect are really good at courting death. He could tell that Duan Muyu and Lin Yi's relationship was not ordinary. Moreover, these people had actually blackmailed Lin Yi himself. If this wasn't courting death, what was? In comparison, the upper echelon members of the Snow Sword School were rather tactful. Duan Muyu was speechless. Even from her point of view, she felt that the higher-ups of her sect were courting death. She wasn't worried about Lin Yi and her situation at all. Instead, she was more worried about Yiling's sect. What if they really angered Lin Yi this time, and he casually destroyed the entire sect? Putting everything else aside, she still had deep feelings for the Yiling sect. Then what does boss mean? Bing Wuqing looked at Lin Yi. There was no need for him to use his brain in such a situation. He would just do whatever Lin Yi said. Even if Lin Yi ordered him to destroy the entire Yiling sect, he would absolutely not object. Of course, for the sake of Duan Muyu, Lin Yi would definitely not do so. There's no hurry. By the way, you saw Qiu Mingcheng just now. Did he look familiar? Lin Yi suddenly asked. Qiu Mingcheng. Bing Wuqing thought for a moment and said, he just went to the secular world to train. There doesn't seem to be anything special about him. Wait, he does look a little familiar. Seems like I'm not mistaken. He's one of them. Lin Yi nodded. What are you guys talking about? Duan Muyu was confused. She had no idea what the two of them were talking about. Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing looked at each other. They didn't hide anything anymore and revealed everything. There's an extremely mysterious and powerful organization in the secular world called the Center. After this training in the secular world, they've already instigated many spies in various primordial sects. If I'm not wrong, they've already brought people to infiltrate the primordial underworld. After lying low for a period of time, they'll probably start to encroach on the primordial alliance. Encroach on the primordial alliance? Is that even possible? Duan Muyu was dumbfounded. She had never seen the Center's strength and resources. Moreover, she was born and raised in the primordial underworld. When she suddenly heard this, she naturally felt that it was a fantasy story. Of course it's possible. They can easily create a bunch of nascent soul-old monsters. Given time, how difficult would it be to encroach on the primordial alliance? Lin Yi said, create a bunch of nascent soul-old monsters. Duan Muyu was completely dumbfounded. Nascent soul-old monsters were the highest combat power in the primordial underworld. If they could really mass-produce them, not to mention encroaching on the primordial alliance, it wouldn't be difficult for them to directly control the entire primordial underworld. Although she was horrified, Duanmuyu quickly recovered. At least on the surface, she had regained her composure. She changed the topic and asked, "Then you said Qiu Mingchong is? He's one of the chess pieces that the center has secretly instigated." Lin Yi confirmed. From the first time he met Qiu Mingchong, he had already been suspicious. However, he didn't have a complete grasp of the center's list of instigated defections. He could only rely on his initial observations. Unless he paid special attention, he would only leave a slight impression. It was only now that he had Bing Wuqing's testimony that he was completely certain. Of course, Bing Wuqing couldn't fully grasp the list of instigated defections. However, every time she contacted the bespectacled doctor, she would more or less meet with other people. Even if she didn't say it explicitly, she could still make some guesses. There's such a thing. Duanmuyu was instantly shocked and angry. Although it was a question, there was no doubt about the meaning behind it. Otherwise, there was no way to explain Qiu Mingchong's recent abnormal behavior. Although this guy always had the intention of replacing her, he didn't have the guts to do so in the past. As the three of them spoke, the iron door outside opened. Qiu Mingchong stood at the door and asked, "How did the discussion go?" "Oh, you mean the consciousness grass? Sorry, it's already been used up by Bing Wuqing." Lin Yi answered casually. This was the truth. The consciousness grass had indeed been used up by Bing Wuqing. "Yes, it's quite delicious." Bing Wuqing took the opportunity to reply. She turned to look at Duanmuyu and said, "You ate it too. How did it taste?" It was indeed quite delicious. Duanmuyu cooperated. Since they already knew that the other party was a spy from the center, this matter was no longer something that she or anyone else sent by Yi Ling could deal with. They could only let Lin Yi handle it. They would do whatever Lin Yi said. "What? You ate it?" Qiu Mingchong exploded in anger. This time, he had used the consciousness grass to stir up trouble, not just to replace Duanmuyu's position. More importantly, he had received orders from the center. If he couldn't fish in troubled waters and get the consciousness grass, the consequences would be unimaginable. Chapter 5391. Nonsense, it's so hard to get the divine knowledge grass. If it were you, wouldn't you eat it? Lin Yi scoffed. But isn't Duanmuyu at Foundation Establishment great perfection? Qiu Mingchong still did not believe it. Sorry, I'm already at the golden core stage. Duanmuyu smiled faintly. You, Qiu Mingchong choked, then flew into a rage out of humiliation. He snorted. I really hope this is just a joke. Otherwise, it won't be good news for the three of you. I can only ask my master to personally punish the three of you. Punish us? Duanmuyu was taken aback. He said with a strange expression, It's fine if they punish me. After all, I'm a disciple of the Yiling sect. But these two are outsiders. Even if your master is the sect leader, what right does he have to punish people from other sects? Qiu Mingchong, is there something wrong with your brain? If this was before, even if he knew that Qiu Mingchong was up to no good, Duanmuyu would not have said this. But now that he knew that Qiu Mingchong was a spy, there was nothing to worry about. Since you're in the territory of the Yiling sect, you naturally have to follow the rules of the Yiling sect. Besides, you're just two weaklings. Can't my master, the sect leader, take care of you? Qiu Mingchong pretended to be pretentious. Of course, he knew that both Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing's powers were not to be underestimated. However, his knowledge was only based on what he had seen in the trial competition. He thought that Lin Yi was invincible below the Golden Elixir realm, while Bing Wuqing was only at the early stage of the Golden Elixir realm. Of course, he had to look up to such powers. However, his master, Yi Qingcheng, was a Golden Elixir perfected being. After hearing his words, Duanmuyu and Bing Wuqing looked at him, as if they were looking at an idiot. Only Lin Yi had a look of agreement on his face. What you said makes so much sense that I actually have nothing to say. Duanmuyu and Bing Wuqing rolled their eyes at the same time. They were speechless that Lin Yi would have the mood to joke with this kind of person. Good that you know. Just you wait. Qiu Mingchong thought that Lin Yi wanted to admit defeat and leave with an arrogant attitude. It was too late for regrets now. In the Divine Leaf Temple, Yi Qingqing and the other elders were waiting for Qiu Mingcheng's good news. However, after Qiu Mingcheng's report, all of their expressions became ugly. This is too much. Yi Qingqing suddenly slammed the table, and the huge conference table turned into powder. He was only one step away from breaking through to the nascent soul realm. Now, his only thought was to obtain the divine sense grass to further refine his divine sense. That way, not only could he become the strongest gold core expert in the ancient martial world, he could also lay a good foundation for breaking through to the nascent soul realm. In the process of breaking through to the nascent soul realm, even if it was just a little bit more confident, he absolutely couldn't let it go. The three of them are clearly looking down on Master and our Yiling sect, especially Duan Muyu, who openly slept with an outsider and ruined the sect's reputation. In my opinion, he must be severely punished. Otherwise, if word of this gets out, we'll become the laughingstock of the pugilistic world. Qiu Mingcheng took the opportunity to sow discord. No one had any objections to this. However, one person suddenly stood up. It was a middle-aged man with snow-white hair. He was thin and had a weak aura. At first glance, he looked like a sickly person who couldn't withstand the wind and rain. However, no one present dared to look down on him. Even the sect master Yi Qingqing was wary of him. This person was called Yi Tongxian, and he was Yi Qingqing's senior and junior brother. At the same time, like Yi Qingqing, he was the only two golden core perfected experts in the Yiling sect. You said that you were slept with an outsider? Yi Tongshuan's cold gaze pierced Qiu Mingcheng's heart. He subconsciously took a few steps back. One should know that he had another identity, which was Duan Muyu's master. If not for his strong backing, Duan Muyu wouldn't have been able to sit in the position of eldest senior sister so easily. However, before today, Yi Tongxian had been in seclusion, so he didn't know what had happened. He also didn't know that his disciple had been grounded because of the consciousness grass, and even had her chastity tainted. I saw it with my own eyes. She and Lin Yi were alone in a room together. Their clothes were torn to shreds, and they even hid on the bed. If this isn't sleeping with him, what is it? Qiu Mingcheng said stubbornly. Call you are here. You can confront him. If he says anything false, you can prepare to die. Yi Tongxian snorted coldly. His tone was extremely overbearing. Duan Muyu was his only direct disciple, and he was famous for being protective of his disciples. Moreover, he had a special identity and was very powerful. Not to mention Qiu Mingcheng, even Yi Qingqing the sect master, couldn't do anything to him. Master! Qiu Mingcheng was so scared that his scalp went numb. He could only look at Yi Qingqing for help. If Yi Tongxian really wanted to kill him, he couldn't do anything unless Yi Qingqing intervened. It was a pity that Yi Tongxian was famous for being a pain in the neck. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Yi Qingqing wouldn't want to confront this junior brother of the same sect. However, Qiu Mingcheng was his direct disciple after all, so he couldn't just ignore him. Junior brother, don't be impulsive. If that's the case, Mingcheng, bring Duan Muyu here with the token to confront him face to face. We'll know the result then, Yi Qingqing said. If the affair was true, then even if he did not do anything, Yi Tongxian would probably clean up the sect. If this matter was fabricated out of thin air by Qiu Mingcheng, then Qiu Mingcheng only had himself to blame. No matter what, Qiu Mingcheng was just a useless disciple. In Yi Qingqing's eyes, Qiu Mingcheng did not have much weight. If he was beaten to death, then so be it. Yes, Qiu Mingcheng didn't dare to be negligent. He quickly took the token and went to fetch Duan Muyu. Having seen that scene with his own eyes, he had full confidence in the matter of Duan Muyu and Lin Yi. At this time, he wasn't particularly flustered. Before he left, he turned his head and asked, Master, what about Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing? Humph. The Black Water Matrix is a first-class trapping matrix. Even an ordinary Yuanying stage-old monster can't break out of the matrix. Let them live and die on their own. Yi Qingqing snorted coldly. This time, he was determined to get the grass of consciousness. He didn't expect that it would turn out like this. He couldn't help but be angry. However, as the leader of a sect, he couldn't easily kill a disciple from another sect. That would give others a bad impression. so he might as well imprison him until the end. Very soon, Qiu Mingchong brought Duan Muyu over. When Duan Muyu saw Yi Tongxian, he was instantly delighted. He hurriedly greeted, "Master, you've come out of seclusion. You are you?" Yi Tongxian originally wanted to ask about the matter of sleeping with him, but when he saw the faint aura around Duan Muyu, his eyelids twitched. He said in surprise, "You've actually succeeded in breaking through to the Golden Elixir realm? And you're still at the peak of the early Golden Elixir realm?" Chapter 5392. As soon as she said this, everyone was in an uproar. At this moment, Duan Muyu did not deliberately release her aura. No one, including Yi Qingcheng, noticed the change in her body. Only Yi Tongxian, who knew her best, saw through it with one glance. Yi Qingcheng and the others were stunned. Not only did she succeed in breaking through to the Golden Elixir realm, but she also became a master at the peak of the early Golden Elixir realm. What was going on? "Master, please understand. I made a good friend during this experience in the secular world. Without him, I would not be where I am today," Duan Muyu said truthfully. Although it was only a matter of time before she broke through to the Golden Elixir realm with her own qualifications, if it were not for Lin Yi, the time would have been dragged on for 3 to 5 years. Moreover, it would have been impossible for her to break through to the peak of the early Golden Elixir realm at once. Oh, there's actually such an extraordinary person? Yi Tongxian could not help but be surprised. He knew that Duan Muyu never lied. To be precise, she disdained lying. There was actually someone who could help her break through to the Golden Elixir realm in such a short period of time. What kind of person was this? At this time, Qiu Mingchong sneered and said, "Hey, you can't be talking about Lin Yi, can you? No wonder you were willing to become his mistress. This is really understandable. You can break through to the Golden Elixir realm by sleeping with someone and rise 2 levels in a row. No matter who it is, they would be tempted, right?" "What did you say?" Duan Muyu frowned. "Pretending? Still pretending at this time? Is there a point? I saw you hiding in bed with my own eyes, and your clothes were torn to pieces on the ground. Dry wood met fire. The two of you must have gone crazy," Qiu Mingchong said sarcastically. Is this true?" Yi Tongxian asked in a low voice. Although he believed in his disciple's character, as Qiu Mingchong said, if Duan Muyu had paid a high enough price, why would the other party help her break through to the Golden Elixir realm for no reason? The resources needed were not just words. Even as a master of the great perfection of the Golden Elixir realm, he might not be able to afford it. Before Duan Muyu could say anything, Yi Qingcheng, who was on the other side, had already come to a conclusion. "Looks like it's true. If this sect leader remembers correctly, you weren't wearing these clothes before you entered, right?" The other elders of the upper echelon all nodded. Duan Muyu was now dressed in the clothes of the mortal world. In the small pugilistic world of the supreme ancient immortal realms, he could be said to be an oddity. It was impossible for them not to notice him. Duan Muyu blushed, which was rare for her. No matter how tough she was, it was impossible for her to say that she had changed her clothes in public. She could only refute. "Sect leader Sherbois, you misunderstood me. It's true that I have changed my clothes, but it doesn't mean that I have done anything shameful." "You've already rolled in the sheets, but you haven't done anything shameful? Haha, this is really rare." Qiu Mingchong was adamant. This kind of thing was equivalent to mud falling into the crotch of one's pants. Even if it wasn't shit, it was still shit. As long as he insisted on not letting go, Duan Muyu would not be able to prove himself. Even jumping into the Yellow River would not be able to wash himself clean. Duan Muyu was furious, but she really did not know how to prove her innocence at the moment. In the face of the suspicious gazes of Yi Qingqing and the others, she could not help but feel helpless. She could not possibly take the initiative to let others verify that she was still a virgin, could she? At this moment, a faint voice suddenly came from the entrance of the Godleaf Palace. "Your Yiling sect is really interesting. I just gave you a set of clothes, but you actually keep such a close watch on what female disciples wear. Just how free are you, the higher-ups, really?" "Who is it?" Yi Qingqing and the others were shocked at the same time. They had so many golden core stage experts, but they did not notice that there were two people standing at the entrance. If the other party did not take the initiative to speak, but instead launched a sneak attack, some of them might have already become corpses. The people who came were none other than Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing. Duan Muyu was suddenly brought here at this time, so it was obvious that someone wanted to harm her. Naturally, Lin Yi would not sit idly by and do nothing about it. Without hesitation, he broke out of the array with Bing Wuqing. Although the black water array was powerful, it was really not enough for him, a profound ascension stage primordial spirit. After all, from the beginning, this array could only be used against ordinary nascent soul stage old monsters. This was already the limit, and there was no concept of a profound ascension stage at all. You have already locked us up. Don't you know who we are? Lin Yi calmly walked to Duan Muyu's side and gave her a look, indicating for her not to worry. Lin Yi, Bing Wuqing. Yi Qingqing frowned and turned to stare at Qiu Mingchong, asking, "What's going on?" I don't know either." Qiu Mingchong was also confused, and quickly explained, "I only have a token in my hand, and it was very smooth when I brought Duan Muyu out just now. They were clearly still locked up in the black water array. Could it be that Duan Muyu discovered some loophole in the black water array, and secretly told them?" Even if he wanted to deny responsibility, he still had to throw the blame on Duan Muyu. Qiu Mingchong showed everyone what it meant to be a villain. Are you stupid? If she knew about the loophole in the array, she would have come out long ago. Why would she wait until now? Lin Yi looked at this guy as if he was looking at an idiot. How dare you? You trespassed into my Yiling sect's important place, and still dare to be so unscrupulous. Do you really think that this sect master will not punish you? Yi Qingqing was furious when he saw this. He did not want to do anything to Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing. After all, they were from the Yiling sect. It would not be good if he attacked them, because he did not get the divine knowledge grass. So he just wanted to let them fend for themselves, but it was different now. He was in an extremely bad mood at the moment, because he did not get the divine knowledge grass. Now that Lin Yi was acting so fearless, wasn't he making things difficult for him in front of everyone? Even if someone were to make some sarcastic remarks about him, he would definitely make this fellow, who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, suffer today. Noisy, did I say you could speak? Lin Yi seemed to wave his hand casually. Yi Qingqing, who was already angry from embarrassment, suddenly quieted down as if he was possessed. He actually lowered his head, and really did not speak. The senior elders of the Yiling sect did not understand what was going on. With their eyesight, they could not see what was going on. They could only see that Lin Yi had made Yi Qingqing obediently shut up with just a few words. They could not help but feel puzzled. Why was the sect master's temper so good? Who was this guy? Among the crowd, only Yi Tongxian seemed to have noticed something. He looked at Lin Yi with shock and anger. He was about to speak, but he saw Duan Muyu shake his head at him. Only then did he forcibly swallow the words on the tip of his tongue and wait and see. Chapter 5393. All right, I'll hold a meeting to discuss the traitor of your Yiling sect. Lin Yi naturally took over the reins. The natural aura of a superior that emanated from his body shocked everyone present. This wasn't an aura of actual threat, but it made everyone feel fear and trepidation from the bottom of their hearts, and they didn't dare to look at him directly. The traitor? Yi Tongxian was stunned. At this time, he was the only one who had the confidence to speak. He frowned and asked, "Who are you calling a traitor?" "The traitor I'm talking about, of course, is him." Lin Yi pointed at Qiu Mingchong with his lips and said casually, "This guy has been secretly bribed by Xue Jianfeng. He's now Xue Jianfeng's lackey." He didn't want to reveal the Central's affairs for now. Firstly, he was afraid of alerting the enemy. Secondly, he was afraid that it would cause too much of a shock to the Immemorial Alliance and cause chaos in the entire Immemorial Underworld. That would give the Central an opportunity to take advantage of, so he could only reveal it bit by bit. As soon as he said this, everyone's eyes focused on Qiu Mingchong. Everyone looked suspicious. After all, they weren't fools. Qiu Mingchong had indeed behaved strangely after returning from the secular world. He wouldn't have stirred up trouble in the past. Could there really be a problem with this guy? Bullshit. Qiu Mingcheng was still at a loss. Hearing this, he quickly retorted, I have nothing to do with Xue Jianfeng. How can I be his lackey? It was you who had an affair with Duan Muyu. You're slandering me and trying to make a false accusation. Master elders don't believe this ignorant bastard. He's trying to drive a wedge between us. Everyone once again turned their doubtful eyes to Lin Yi. Compared to Qiu Mingcheng, Lin Yi, this outsider with an unknown background, seemed to be a bigger problem. Do you have evidence? Yi Tongxian frowned and asked. In the past, Lin Yi might have patiently helped them find evidence. However, he wasn't in the mood today. He immediately said to Bing Wuqing, I'll leave it to you. If he doesn't admit it, kill him. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone was dumbfounded. This was Yi Ling's sect. Wasn't this guy being too overbearing? This was Yi Ling's sect's territory. And he was facing Qiu Mingcheng, the second-ranked top-notch disciple of Yi Ling's sect. Yet, this fellow couldn't even be bothered to provide the most basic evidence, and just wanted to kill him. Who did he think he was? Aren't you going too far? Yi Tongxian could not stand it any longer. Although he was Duan Muyu's master, and naturally stood on Duan Muyu's side, he was still one of the important higher-ups of the Yi Ling sect. He could not stand to see Lin Yi slapping him in the face so unscrupulously. That's right. Who do you think you are? How dare you come here and point your fingers? Another high-level elder stood up angrily. This person was Qiu Hong, an expert at the pinnacle of the late Golden Elixir realm. In terms of strength and status, he was second only to Yi Qingqing and Yi Tongxian. He had a fiery temper, and most importantly, he was a distant relative of Qiu Mingcheng. He could be considered Qiu Mingcheng's second backer. At this moment, Yi Qingqing was not saying anything for some reason, and Qiu Mingcheng was being threatened in public. As the second backer, he could only stand up to support the situation. Of course, from Qiu Hong's point of view, Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing were simply acting recklessly, and he could use this opportunity to boost his prestige. Lin Yi ignored him, and neither did Bing Wuqing. After all, she never had the habit of talking nonsense. Seeing the situation, she directly pressed the merciless ice force over. Qiu Hong didn't even have the time to react. He didn't even have the chance to resist, and was pressed to the ground on the spot. Nascent soul realm old monster. Qiu Hong was already speechless. Yi Tongxian and the others were all shocked. After all, this was the headquarters of the Yi Ling sect. Before this, Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing were just courting death in their eyes. Even if Bing Wuqing was widely recognized as a super genius, so what? She was only at the early Golden Elixir realm. At most, she could advance one level to the pinnacle of the early Golden Elixir realm. So what? Who would have thought that she had not only advanced one level, but had also advanced directly to the level of a nascent soul realm old monster? How were they supposed to deal with this? In front of a nascent soul realm old monster, these people were like paper. No wonder Lin Yi was so arrogant. He really had the confidence. The group of Yi Ling sect's higher-ups were all scared silly, Yi Tongxian included, and no one said anything. As for Qiu Hong, who was kneeling on the ground, he did not even dare to raise his head, for fear of making eye contact with the other party. If he accidentally angered the other party, he could die. Bing Wuqing's gaze immediately fell on Qiu Mingcheng. According to Lin Yi's instructions, if this guy refused to admit it, he could become a corpse. Anyway, they had completely broken off their relationship with the sect, so it did not matter if they killed an unimportant pawn of the sect. Don't come any closer. Qiu Mingcheng was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. He would never have thought that there would be a day when he would be cornered to this extent in the Yi Ling sect's headquarters. Based on the other party's attitude, if he dared to deny it, he might really become a corpse. Live or die you choose, Bing Wuqing said expressionlessly. Qiu Mingcheng cursed madly in his heart. Right now he could only live by admitting that he was a spy. But if he did that, would these people from Yi Ling's sect let him go? In the end he would still die. Unfortunately, Bing Wuqing was obviously not in the mood to think so much for him. Seeing that he was hesitating, she directly enveloped him with her heartless ice force. With Chiao Mingchong's meager strength, he did not even need to do anything. In the blink of an eye, he would be frozen into a popsicle. Master, save me! Master's junior uncle, save me! Chiao Mingchong felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. He screamed in panic, but the group of Yiling sect's higher-ups pretended not to hear him. What a joke! How could they dare to be presumptuous in front of a nascent soul-old monster like Bing Wuqing? Then die. Bing Wuqing made the final death sentence. No. If you dare to kill me, you'll definitely die a worse death than me in the future. Shui Jianfeng will avenge me. Chiao Mingchong shouted at the top of his lungs in a final struggle. Actually, Lin Yi was not wrong at all. His current superior was no longer the bespectacled professor, but really Shui Jianfeng. In order to show how much importance he attached to Shui Jianfeng, the bespectacled professor had already assigned a portion of his spies to him. Meanwhile, he himself only paid attention to a few high-end combatants, including Shui Jianfeng. There was no need for him to be distracted by a nobody like Chiao Mingchong. After shouting this, Chiao Mingchong closed his eyes and waited for his death. However, after a moment of fear and trepidation, he realized that the bone-chilling aura that enveloped him had suddenly dissipated. Bing Wuqing had actually let him go. Chapter 5394. As he spoke, Lin Yi released Yi Qingqing's primordial spirit. This guy suddenly stopped moving just now, because his primordial spirit was taken away by Lin Yi's soul-hooking hand. Now that his primordial spirit was back, Yi Qingqing was horrified. The experience just now was too horrifying. He didn't want to experience the feeling of his life and death being in the hands of the other party again. Deal with this traitor yourselves. I won't interfere, Lin Yi said lightly. This? Yi Qingqing hesitated. Chiao Mingchong was his direct disciple, and he wouldn't abandon him unless he had no other choice. But now that Chiao Mingchong had publicly admitted his identity as a spy, especially with Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing, these two unfathomable guys, watching him covetously, he didn't dare to play any tricks at this time. He could only bite the bullet and say, "Guards, take Chiao Mingchong, this traitor, into custody. We'll discuss how to deal with him later." Lin Yi didn't have any objections. He dragged Chiao Mingchong out purely to help Duan Muyu out of trouble. As for whether Chiao Mingchong was dead or alive, he didn't care at all. Moreover, from the standpoint of Yiling sect, it was hateful to discover such a traitor, but they couldn't execute him directly. There were still many things that needed to be clarified. For example, why did Shui Jianfeng bribe Chiao Mingchong? Watching the dejected Chiao Mingchong being taken away, Lin Yi glanced at Yi Qingqing and the others and said, "Now, does anyone still believe Chiao Mingchong's slander of Miss Duanmu?" No, you must be joking. How can we believe the words of a traitor?" Yi Qingqing hurriedly smiled apologetically and humbly. The others might be mainly afraid of Bing Wuqing, the nascent soul realm old monster. But in his eyes, Lin Yi was the most terrifying existence. This guy was definitely much more terrifying than the average nascent soul realm old monster. Is that so? Then what about the divine knowledge grass? Lin Yi raised his eyebrows and said casually. Yi Qingqing and the others broke out in a cold sweat. When they recalled how they had tried to force Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing to ask for the divine knowledge grass previously, they felt as though 10,000 horses were galloping through their hearts. Now that they thought about it, they realized that they were practically seeking death in all sorts of ways. A heavenly treasure like the spirit knowledge grass naturally belongs to those who are able to obtain it. Only people of your strength are qualified to do so. We were rude before, so I sincerely apologize to you on behalf of Yiling sect. Yi Qingqing hurriedly said respectfully. Lin Yi glanced at Duan Muyu when he heard that. He had come here purely to visit a friend, and it was entirely up to Duan Muyu to decide whether or not to make a fuss and take revenge. As for himself, it didn't matter. At his level, he wouldn't take such a small matter to heart, much less Bing Wuqing. Duan Muyu returned a pleading look. She had suffered a lot during this period of time, but after all, she had deep feelings for Yiling sect. Since the culprit Chiao Mingchong had been taken care of, the matter would end here. Otherwise, Yiling sect would be the one to suffer losses. All right, on account of Miss Duanmu, I'll temporarily accept your insincere apology. However, I'll say the ugly words first. I don't have a good temper. If there's a next time, I won't be so nice anymore. Lin took the opportunity to give everyone a heads up. In this way, if Yi Qingqing and the others wanted to settle accounts with Duan Muyu later, they would have to think twice. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you for your magnanimity, senior. We are very grateful. Yi Qingqing didn't dare to refute. Even though he was a sect leader, and even though there was only a thin line between golden core perfected and nascent soul old monsters, this thin line meant that he had no right to speak in front of Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing. They could kill him with just a thought. So what could he do? Yi Qingqing's only thought at this moment was to send Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing away as soon as possible. This time, for the sake of the consciousness grass, he had been blinded by Qiu Mingcheng's instigation and had set his sights on the two of them. Now it was easy to invite them in, but difficult to send them away. He was in a difficult position. The key was that he couldn't directly ask them to leave. His eyes turned, and he had an idea in this emergency. Both of you are experts, and we are too weak to serve you well. Why don't I report to our sect's Grand Supreme Elder and ask him to entertain the two of you? It was the rule of Jianghu to have a nascent soul old monster entertain a nascent soul old monster. It was reasonable for him to suggest this. At least, he could avoid being bullied unilaterally. Otherwise, it would be really stressful for him and the group of gold core stage higher-ups to talk. Whatever. Lin waved his hand noncommittally. He had no interest in the Yi Ling sect's Grand Supreme Elder. But since he was here, there was no harm in meeting him. It could also be considered as helping Duan Muyu gain some face. Okay. Please wait for a moment, seniors. I'll report to the Grand Supreme Elder right away. Yi Qingqing immediately rushed out. Logically speaking, even if they were to ask for the Grand Supreme Elder's permission, there was no need for him, the sect leader, to go personally. However, he couldn't have asked for more. After all, Qiu Mingcheng was his personal disciple. Although Qiu Mingcheng had instigated the matter of the consciousness grass, it was mainly his own idea. At this time, he didn't dare to stay in front of Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing for even a moment. The pressure was too great. After a while, an old man in green walked quickly into the God Leaf Hall accompanied by Yi Qingqing. His aura was hidden, but it gave people a feeling of unfathomable depth. All the higher-ups of the Yi Ling sect, including Yi Tongxian and Duan Muyu, hurriedly greeted him in unison. Without a doubt, this was the Yi Ling sect's Grand Supreme Elder, Yi Yixing. Not only was he the Grand Supreme Elder, but he was also Yi Qingqing's and Yi Tongshuan's master. In other words, he was Duan Muyu's master. My two friends have come to visit. Please forgive me for not going out to greet you. Yi Yixing cupped his hands in greeting and smiled. All these years, he had been in a state of semi-isolation. If something like this had not happened, he would normally not have come out. Bing Wuqing looked at him with some scrutiny. He was a little stronger than her, at the middle nascent soul stage. However, it was obvious that this guy had internal injuries. Ordinary people couldn't see it, but it couldn't escape the observation of an expert at the peak of the early nascent soul stage. Chapter 5395. Cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. If you did not advance, you would fall behind. Lin knew very well what it meant for the other party to be injured for such a long time, without being able to recover. Even though this supreme elder of the Yi Ling sect was still a top-rate existence that was like a pillar that stabilized the world, if this were to continue developing, then it wouldn't be long before the supreme elder of the Yi Ling sect would step down from his peak. Unless he obtained a fortuitous encounter before the situation worsened to the worst. To some extent, Lin Yi's appearance itself represented a fortuitous encounter. Unfortunately, Lin Yi had no intention of giving the other party a fortuitous encounter. Yi Yixing was indeed Duan Muyu's grandmaster, and for Duan Muyu's sake, theoretically, Lin Yi would show some kindness, but that was on the premise that he found the other party pleasing to the eye. But now, because of Duan Muyu's experience, basically no one in the entire Yi Ling sect could enter Lin Yi's eyes, including Yi Yixing, the Grand Supreme Elder. Leni did not believe that this old guy did not know that Duan Muyu was forced to give up the divine knowledge grass. Acquiescence was Yi Yixing's attitude. In that case, he had to pay the corresponding price. Of course, for Duan Muyu's sake, Leni would not impose additional punishment on him. Otherwise, even if the other party was a middle-stage nascent soul expert, he would not be able to fight back in front of him. Lin Yi's side showed a lack of interest, while Yi Yixing's side was wary. After all, in his current state, Bing Wuqing, who was at the peak of the early-stage nascent soul, was enough to make him suffer. With the addition of Lin Yi, whose strength was unknown, once a fight broke out, he had no chance of winning. With such attitudes, after a few words of greeting, the atmosphere quickly fell into an awkward silence. Yi Yixing was the same as Yi Qingcheng. Right now, the most important thing in his eyes was to quickly send Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing away. Otherwise he would not be at ease. Since there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. Lin Yi was not an insensible person. He knew that his purpose of helping Duan Muyu's growth had been achieved, and staying any longer would only be as bad as not doing enough. He immediately called Bing Wuqing and prepared to leave. All right, fellow Taoists, please take care. Forgive this old man for not seeing you off. Yi Yixing and the others heaved a sigh of relief. At this time, Duan Muyu suddenly stopped him and said, "Wait, it's rare for you to come all the way to see me, and you even encountered these things. As the host, shouldn't you let me entertain you before you leave? Is this appropriate?" Lin Yi glanced at Yi Yi's group. It's appropriate. Ye's group nodded hurriedly. At this time, they felt very guilty. As long as Duan Muyu's request was not too excessive, they had to agree. The Rain Admiration Pavilion was one of the many independent pavilions in the Leaf Spirit sect. Apart from its relatively quiet and elegant surroundings, there was nothing special about it. If one had to say, its owner was Duan Muyu. As a woman, no matter how manly her actions were, she would never be able to change her weak and sentimental side. This was not often shown on Duan Muyu, but some clues could be seen from the various arrangements in the Rain Admiration Pavilion. "Huh, I thought you lived in the same place as us. Turns out you're still a little feminine." Lin Yi looked around in surprise. Duan Muyu looked at him with hidden bitterness and said faintly, "I'm a woman after all right? Don't tell me I'm a real man in your eyes?" "Not to that extent. You're a manly woman." Lin Yi laughed. As their friendship deepened, the way they spoke to each other became more familiar. Otherwise he wouldn't have made such a joke. Manly woman? Duan Muyu frowned and digested the meaning of this secular word. Then the corner of her mouth suddenly curled up. "Wait for me, I'll go change my clothes." "Change your clothes?" Lin Yi was stunned, but Duan Muyu didn't give him a chance to ask. She turned around and went to the bedroom, leaving him alone in the pavilion to wait. As for Bing Wuqing, she didn't follow him. She stayed in the Godleaf Palace to be entertained by Yi Yixing and the others. Anyone could see that Duan Muyu wanted to entertain Lin Yi alone. Bing Wuqing was a sensible person, so she naturally wouldn't follow him and be a third wheel. After the time it took for a joss stick to burn, when Duan Muyu reappeared in front of him, Lin Yi was dumbfounded. Actually, there was nothing special about it. It was just a plain dress that was commonly seen in the immemorial pugilistic world. However, when it was worn by Duan Muyu, there was a different kind of charm. It was a unique charm that was extremely rare to see on other women. Heroic, gentle, Duan Muyu in a plain dress perfectly blended the two together. Although with her looks, she definitely wouldn't look bad in other clothes, especially when she wore the secular women's clothes that Lin Yi gave her. It was undeniable that the Duan Muyu in front of him was the most beautiful Duan Muyu. On her, Lin Yi saw true femininity for the first time. "Why? Is it very awkward?" Duan Muyu looked at Lin Yi's strange expression and couldn't help but feel a little nervous. With her style, she rarely dressed like this, and it might not even happen once a year. Today was considered a special treatment for Lin Yi. No, it's quite nice." Lin Yi pinched his nose awkwardly. He had always been surrounded by beautiful women, and his immunity to beautiful women had already reached the level of a master. Normally, he wouldn't look like a pervert. However, the contrast between Duan Muyu's appearance and just now was too big. Normally, anyone would be stunned, especially a hot-blooded man. Is that so? Duanmuyu blushed for the first time. Then, she hurriedly turned around and brewed some tea as a cover. This is the emerald grass I just brewed. It's a good tea unique to our Yiling sect. You can't buy it outside. Try it. One night stand. Ling Yi's expression suddenly became extremely strange. What? Duanmuyu didn't react. Nothing. Lin Yi immediately blushed with shame. Fortunately, she didn't know the meaning of the word, or else he might have thought that he was flirting with her. He took the teacup and took a sip, then praised. Although I don't know much about tea, your tea does leave a fragrant aftertaste in my mouth. Drink the tea, look at the lake, and if I can listen to music, that would be perfect. You want to listen to music? Duanmuyu glanced at him, turned around, walked to the side and lifted the curtain. Lin Yi thought it was just another table, but he didn't expect it to be a guqin under the curtain. The melodious sound of the guqin rang out. Looking at Duanmuyu's focused appearance, Lin Yi couldn't help but smile playfully. Today, Duanmuyu was really like a different person from before. Chapter 5396. Intuition told Lin Yi that Duanmuyu must have her own reasons for doing this. However, it was almost evening, and Duanmuyu still did not say anything special. It seemed that she really just wanted to entertain him alone. With a stomach full of puzzlement, Lin Yi said goodbye to Duanmuyu and left Yiling's sect with Bing Wuqing. She seems to have something to say, Bing Wuqing suddenly said. Unfortunately, she doesn't seem to want to say it. Lin Yi shook his head helplessly. This matter had troubled him for the whole afternoon. He had been wondering if Duanmuyu had any other difficulties, but after thinking about it carefully, she was already an expert at the peak of the early gold elixir realm, and she had powerful external help like himself and Bing Wuqing. Even if Yi Qingqing wanted to deal with her, he would have to think carefully. Theoretically, there should not be any other difficulties. Perhaps he had been shocked by the other party's femininity today, and was overthinking things. The two talked as they came to the lakeside. At this time, a huge flying spirit beast suddenly descended from the sky. It was a thorny eagle with blade-like feathers, and an old acquaintance alighted from its back. It was the young master of the Thousand Blades sect, Ling Tianyu. What a coincidence! Seeing this, Lin Yi smiled slightly. Although they were not very close friends, he had a good impression of this super genius. Ling Tianyu could be considered one of the few friends he had in the immemorial underworld. Haha, this is not a coincidence. I heard that Brother Lin came to Yiling's sect, so I specially came here to show my hospitality as a host. Ling Tianyu laughed. He was a little surprised to see Bing Wuqing beside him, but he soon understood. Ordinary people would think of ways to draw a genius like Bing Wuqing to their side, provided that they had the ability to do so. And obviously Lin Yi had the ability. Hospitality as a host. Is your Thousand Blades sect also nearby? Lin Yi asked. Yes, our two sects' territories are adjacent to each other, so I can be considered half a host here. Ling Tianyu smiled and said, There happens to be a pavilion here. I've prepared some good wine and delicacies for Brother Lin. Take it as a welcoming dinner for you. He didn't have any intention of directly inviting Lin Yi to the Thousand Blades sect. Firstly, their friendship hadn't reached that stage yet. Secondly, he was afraid that if Lin Yi went, it would be difficult for him to usurp the host's position. After all, the current Thousand Blades sect wasn't the same as before. At the very least, it didn't have a nascent soul cultivator to hold the fort. Haha, then it would be impolite to refuse. Lin Yi didn't decline, and immediately sat down opposite Ling Tianyu with Bing Wuqing. He didn't dislike Ling Tianyu's tactful way of expressing goodwill. The three of them sat down, and Ling Tianyu first toasted 3 times. Although he didn't say any pleasantries, everyone could see the gratitude in his words. Unlike Xue Jianfeng, this super genius of the Thousand Blades school wasn't someone who would bite the hand that fed him. I heard about what Brother Lin did in the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island. What a big move. I believe the whole Archaic Alliance will be in an uproar, Ling Tianyu said. A nascent soul cultivator like Chen Jiu was killed, and the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island changed. This wasn't a trivial matter for the whole archaic underworld. After all, it was a sect of one of the 10 small families. It might seem stable in the short term, but the follow-up effects would come soon. It was just that the matter hadn't completely fermented yet. Will it? Lenny was a little surprised. Of course, he knew that this kind of thing would cause some disturbance, but he had no idea what kind of external impact it would have. After all, his understanding of the Archaic Alliance was really limited. Of course it will. The Blue Cloud sect of the North Island is one of the 10 small families, and is also a main member of the North Island Alliance. It has a lot of influence in the whole Archaic Alliance. Brother Lin, I don't know how many people are watching your sudden appearance, not to mention that this year is so special, Ling Tianyu said with a smile. Special? How is it special? Lenny couldn't help but ask. Among all the major powers in the supreme ancient underworld, the 4 great clans and sects stand at the top, while the 10 small clans and sects are second to them. These 14 powers control at least 80% of the experts and resources, and they control the fate of the entire supreme ancient underworld. In order to be ranked among them, all the clans and sects are willing to pay any price. And this year is the year of the general election. Ling Tianyu's eyes shone as he spoke. The election year? Lenny had a strange expression. This word made him subconsciously think of the various elections in the secular world. But this was only the system of ordinary society, and was not realistic in the cultivation world, where the strong were respected. Could it be that the archaic small underworld also did this? Yes, the election of 1,000 years. This is a rule set by the Archaic Alliance when it was first established. From the 4 big families to the 10 small families, every position must be reevaluated, and the strong will be in the top position, while the weak will be eliminated. This is a rare event in the entire archaic small underworld. Brother Lin, haven't you heard of it? Ling Tianyu said and glanced at Bing Wuqing. Although the latter had now openly joined Lin Yi's team, he would not meddle in other people's business. Even if he knew about the election of 1,000 years, he would not care too much, let alone take the initiative to mention it to Lin Yi. I really haven't heard of it. Lin Yi shook his head and said doubtfully, but if I remember correctly, whether it is the 4 big families or the 10 small families, it seems that they are divided according to the number of Yuanying realm mold monsters. Is there a need for an election? The number of Yuanying realm mold monsters in a sect was something obvious. In theory, there was no need for any election at all. The so-called election of 1,000 years couldn't just be a formality, right? Indeed. But there is also a difference in strength between the Yuanying realm mold monsters. Even if there is a Yuanying realm mold monster in each sect, and they are all in the 10 small families, there is still a ranking. The stronger the Yuanying realm mold monster, the higher the status of the sect and family they belong to, and the more power they have in various major events. Therefore, it is no exaggeration to say that the election of 1,000 years is actually a reshuffle of the top experts of the entire archaic small underworld. Who is strong and who is weak will always be determined, Ling Tianyu explained. According to what you said, the Yuanying realm old monsters of each sect and family will fight with each other? Lin Yi's interest was piqued. Chapter 5397. Although he was the young head of the Thousand Blades sect, he was only an expert at the peak of the late stage of Foundation Establishment realm, far from the level of a Yuanying realm old monster. He had only heard rumors about these things, but he didn't know the details. Well, at the level of a Yuanying realm old monster, they don't really need to fight to decide who is better. By the way, since the Millennium Selection is a grand event of the entire primitive small Jianghu, it shouldn't be a gathering of Yuanying realm old monsters, right? Lin Yi asked. Of course not. Although Yuanying realm old monsters are the decisive threshold to measure the level of a sect or family, other aspects can't be ignored. The competition between the backbone experts of the Gold Core stage, especially the competition between the young disciples, is the highlight, Ling Tianyu said. It seems that there will be a good show to watch. Lin Yi nodded. Haha, Brother Lin. You are now the actual controller of the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island. The position that the Blue Cloud sect can occupy depends on you. At that time, you will also have to suppress the young disciples in the competition. Even if you want to watch a good show, you don't have the time, do you? Ling Tianyu couldn't help but laugh. Linny almost forgot about this. He shook his head and asked with a smile. What about your Thousand Blades sect? We have no choice. We don't have any Yuanying realm old monsters now, so we have no hope of becoming one of the 10 small sects and families. We can only try to fight for a strong position in the periphery first, such as getting a substitute qualification from one of the 10 small sects and families. Although we won't have much say in this way, we can at least get some benefits when something happens and prepare to return to the 10 small sects and families in the future. Ling Tianyu had a wry smile on his face, but his tone was extremely firm. This unprecedented super genius of the Thousand Blades sect was obviously full of confidence in reviving the sect. The hope of the Thousand Blades sect was all tied to him. Substitute qualification. Since you can become one of the 10 small sects and families, it means that each of them has a Yuanying realm old monster. Even if your Thousand Blades sect also has a Yuanying realm old monster, you can't be the 11th, right? Linny asked curiously. Theoretically, yes, but it's not like there's no chance at all. Ling Tianyu smiled profoundly. What do you mean? Linny asked. Ling Tianyu glanced at Bing Wuqing, who was beside him. Instead of answering, he smiled and said, Speaking of which, I haven't congratulated Brother Bing yet. Advancing to the nascent soul realm is a joyous occasion. Let me offer you a toast. Of course, Bing Wuqing's strength couldn't be hidden from Ling Tianyu. Ordinary people would tremble in fear in front of a nascent soul realm old monster. But Ling Tianyu didn't feel the slightest bit of restraint. In fact, from the moment they met, other than greeting each other, he didn't even say a word, let alone flatter her. As a Foundation Establishment realm expert, Ling Tianyu was able to completely ignore the presence of a nascent soul realm old monster. Bing Wuqing nodded slightly and toasted with him. She didn't show the slightest contempt. Even though she was an expert at the peak of the early nascent soul realm, she wouldn't underestimate Ling Tianyu because of this. After all, the other party had 1,000 blades flying at the same time. After the two of them toasted, Ling Tianyu continued. Snow Sword faction already has 3 nascent soul realm old monsters. Such a luxurious lineup is no longer something that the 10 small sects and clans can accommodate. Snow Sword faction's target this time is the 4 big sects and clans that stand at the top. Brother Bing, am I right? That's exactly what I meant. Bing Wuqing nodded. The 4 big sects and clans represented the top status and strength. It was something that everyone in Snow Sword faction dreamed of. Now that they finally had such an opportunity, they naturally wouldn't let it go. That's right. Maybe after this millennium election, the 4 big sects and clans will become 5. At that time, one of the 10 small sects and clans will become vacant. Won't our Thousand Blades faction have the opportunity to fill in the vacancy? Ling Tianyu said with a smile. But what if Snow Sword faction can't advance further? Linny asked. It's not that there's no chance. The other 10 small sects and clans will more or less encounter some problems. Take Yiling's sect for example. There are rumors in Jianghu that their supreme elder Yi Yixing suffered a backlash and hasn't recovered yet. Once his strength falls out of the nascent soul realm, this millennium election will be very dangerous. He might even be removed from the list, Ling Tianyu said. Yes, Yi Yixing's condition is indeed not very optimistic. If he keeps recuperating in seclusion, he might be a little better. But if he really goes out to fight with other nascent soul old monsters for this millennium election, the consequences will be unimaginable. Linny had the right to speak on this matter. Yi Ling's sect was already in such a precarious situation, but Yi Qingqing and the others were still messing around internally. They were simply courting death. Yi Ling's sect knows this situation better than anyone else. As soon as I came back, I heard that they had already made preparations. There's a Qin family nearby. It's a local family, and originally, it wasn't anything special. But 2 years ago, a nascent soul old monster appeared out of nowhere. It's a pity that their foundation is too weak. Otherwise, They might be able to take advantage of this millennium election to become one of the 10 small sects and clans, Ling Tianyu said. What does the Qin family have to do with Yi Ling sect's preparations? Lin Yi asked. The Qin family has a nascent soul-old monster, but no foundation. Yi Ling sect has a foundation, but a nascent soul-old monster can't. Don't these two complement each other? So someone proposed a marriage alliance. The Qin family has a nascent soul-old monster's grandson, Qin Xiaohao, while the Yi Ling sect has your friend, Duan Muyu. Ling Tianyu intentionally reminded him. In the small pugilistic world of the primordial era, it was nothing new for different sects and families to work together because of benefits. The Blue Cloud sect and the Chun family of the Northern Island were examples. Yi Ling sect was forced to do so they could only follow suit. What? Lin Yi was stunned for a long time. Only now did he finally understand Duan Muyu's unusual behavior. She, who had always been elegant and neat, suddenly showed her feminine side to him. It turned out that she was going to marry someone soon. Suddenly hearing this news, Lin Yi's heart was inexplicably moved. He and Duan Muyu had never thought about the relationship between a man and a woman before, mainly because Duan Muyu was too manly most of the time. No matter how happy they were when they got along, Lin Yi wouldn't take the initiative to contact her in this direction, mainly because he was embarrassed. I treat you as a brother, but you actually want to fuck me? If Duan Muyu said this, it would be so embarrassing, right? Chapter 5398. And it was certain that Duan Muyu's feelings for him were not purely brotherly. Otherwise, there would not be such a unique treatment just now. With Lin Yi's character, since he found out that they both liked each other, and now that he suddenly learned that Duan Muyu was forced to marry someone else, he would feel very uncomfortable if he just stood by and did nothing to stop it. But the problem was that Duan Muyu's action was a hint, but she didn't say it out loud. She didn't say anything, which in itself might represent her attitude. The subtext was that she did like Lin Yi, but she decided to accept her fate. In this way, even if Lin Yi wanted to stop it, it would be very difficult. What reason could he use to stop it? And what identity could he use to stop it? Lin Yi fell into silence for a while. Bing Wuqing saw this, but unfortunately, others couldn't help in this kind of thing. As for Ling Tianyu, he still didn't realize it. Seeing that Lin Yi didn't speak for a long time, Ling Tianyu thought he was a little drunk. After all, the wine he brought had a lingering effect, and it was easy for people who drank it for the first time to drink too much. He immediately suggested, "It's getting late, and there's an inn nearby that belongs to my Thousand Blades sect. Why don't you two rest for a night, and I'll take you to a good place tomorrow morning." That's good. At this time, Lin Yi's mind was not on this at all. Anyway, he was going to walk around Middle Island during this period of time, so he could do whatever the other party said. After tossing and turning all night, the next morning, Ling Tianyu woke up Lin Yi with a mysterious look, but he didn't speak directly. Instead, he looked at Bing Wuqing, as if he wanted to say something. He took Lin Yi to this good place to repay his kindness, but Bing Wuqing was different. He had nothing to do with Bing Wuqing. Although they were not enemies, they were not friends either. So he was in a difficult position. If it had been anyone else, they would have tactfully taken the initiative to avoid arousing suspicion. However, Bing Wuqing was completely indifferent to this. With her strength and temperament, she would never act according to other people's intentions, unless Lin Yi said so. Wuqing is one of us. Wherever I can go, he can go. Of course, if Brother Ling feels that it's inconvenient to bring two people at once, then forget it, Lin Yi said. Upon hearing this, Bing Wuqing didn't say anything, but the way she looked at Lin Yi warmed. Even though he always looked cold and indifferent, his heart was still made of flesh. He didn't care about ordinary people, but Boss Lin Yi's approval was still very important to him. Ling Tianyu was a little embarrassed, but he still gritted his teeth and said, "Fine, let's go together." The three of them immediately stepped onto the flying spirit beast, and they flew for 2 days and 2 nights. Their destination was not the middle island that Lin Yi thought, but an isolated island in the south. Even Bing Wuqing, a native of the ancient martial world, didn't know about its location. This good place that you mentioned is really mysterious. What are we doing here? Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing looked at each other, their eyes full of doubt. With their strength, they didn't need to be afraid of anything. But this place was really a little mysterious. Hee, don't be impatient. You'll know when we get there. Ling Tianyu smiled mysteriously. This island wasn't big, but the terrain was extremely long and narrow. Looking from above, it looked like a giant half-coiled snake. Ling Tianyu led the two to land at the tail of the snake, which was at the lowest point of the terrain. Not only the three of them, but there were also people rushing over in twos and threes from other directions. Whether by tacit agreement or by rule, everyone landed in the same open space. After landing, these people didn't act on their own, but gathered together. They seemed to be extremely vigilant toward each other, and even had obvious hostility toward each other. It was just that no one wanted to stir up trouble. Linny glanced around, and found that these people were very careful. Even if they were in the same trade, they wouldn't talk to each other easily. Even if they did talk, they would set up a sound isolating formation beforehand, so no one could hear what they were saying. Of course, with Lin Yi's strength, it wouldn't be difficult for him to eavesdrop on these people's conversations, if he really wanted to. After all, the strongest among them were only at the golden core stage, and the weakest were only at the foundation establishment stage. But the weakest were at the foundation establishment late stage. But with Ling Tianyu standing beside him, Linny didn't need to do anything unnecessary, and just asked directly, "Can you tell me now? What's going on?" Linny turned his head and asked, "Actually, even if I don't say it, I think Brother Lin and Brother Bing can roughly guess what's going on. We are here to participate in a secret trial. This place is one of the most secretive islands in the entire ancient underworld, Tai Snake Island," Ling Tianyu finally explained. The legendary Tai Snake Island? Linny didn't say anything, but Bing Wuqing was slightly stunned when she heard this word. Although she had no idea about this place, she had heard of Tai Snake Island. That's right. It is said that this Tai Snake Island was formed from the body of an ancient vicious beast, Tai Snake. Therefore, when you look at it from a bird's eye view, it is in the shape of a giant snake. In the entire ancient Jianghu, there are many who have heard of this place, but those who know its exact location are few and far between. Linny was planning to learn more about it, when a middle-aged man in black came from afar. He was wearing a typical butler's uniform. Everywhere he passed, the people around him uncharacteristically took the initiative to greet him with a smile. It seemed that his background was not small. "Young Master Ling, we meet again." The middle-aged man in black quickly came in front of the three, and took the initiative to greet Ling Tianyu. "Yes, it's been 3 years. How have you been, steward you?" Ling Tianyu also smiled and nodded. "It seems that this is your first time here. How should I address you, steward you?" The middle-aged man in black turned to look at Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing. "Let me introduce you. This is the Grand Master Lin Yi of the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island, and this is Bing Wuqing of the Snow Sword sect. I brought them here." Ling Tianyu took the initiative to introduce them. He pointed at the black-robed man and said, "This is the steward in charge of Tai Snake Island, steward you. His seniority in the Archaic Alliance is one of the best. It's just that few outsiders know about him." "Nice to meet you." Steward Yu nodded slightly at Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing, not showing any surprised expression. Of course, this was because Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing had habitually restrained their aura. Otherwise, if he really knew that there was a nascent soul-old monster standing in front of him, he would not be so calm, unless he was the nascent soul-old monster. Chapter 5399. Everyone looked at each other and smiled. Only Lenny was confused. He knew about the divine knowledge grass, but what was the divine knowledge fruit? The divine knowledge fruit is one of the most precious treasures of heaven and earth. Together with the divine knowledge grass, they are known as the divine knowledge twin treasures. Bing Wuqing became a little excited. "Tell me the details," Lenny said casually. The effect of the divine knowledge grass is to refine one's divine sense, while the divine knowledge fruit can directly upgrade one's primordial spirit by 1 level. Bing Wuqing was not a man who was easily moved, But the temptation of the divine knowledge fruit was endless for any expert. The higher the level of strength, the more irresistible this temptation was. The same upgrade of the primordial spirit was a completely different concept for a foundation establishment expert and a nascent soul-old monster. Then what will happen if I eat more? Lenny asked. Ling Tianyu froze for a moment when he heard this, then interjected with a strange look on his face. This is a spiritual knowledge fruit, just like the spiritual knowledge grass. It is a rare treasure that can only be found by chance. How can it be so easy to find? It is already a great fortune to have one. Brother Lin, why don't you even know this? What if I'm extremely lucky? Lenny did not give up at all. I don't know. Maybe I can upgrade one level with one divine knowledge fruit. But if I eat too much of it, I will definitely develop a resistance. Who knows? Ling Tianyu shook his head and laughed. Lenny nodded. Seeing that everyone around him, including Bing Wuqing, were so eager, he couldn't help but ask curiously. The divine knowledge fruit can directly upgrade one's primordial spirit by one level. This is very rare, but it is only upgrading one's primordial spirit, not real strength. Is there a need to be so excited? In his opinion, the divine knowledge fruit sounded covetous. But in terms of effect, it was not as effective as the foundation establishment pill or the golden core pill. There was no reason to be so excited, right? Brother Lin, what you're saying is fresh. If one's primordial spirit is upgraded, wouldn't it be a matter of time for one's strength to increase? In our immemorial Jianghu, all the major sects and clans focus on cultivating divine sense. Upgrading one's primordial spirit naturally means that one's strength will rise along with it. Moreover, the divine sense fruit has a similar tempering effect to the divine sense grass to a certain extent, but it's not as extreme. Ling Tianyu explained in surprise. I see. Upon hearing this, Lenny suddenly understood. He had long known that the ancient small world and the Heaven Step Island walked two completely different paths. The former focused on the divine sense, while the latter focused on the physical body. Ling Tianyu's explanation made it even clearer. While the few of them were talking, Marquis continued to speak in a clear voice. All right, since everyone is able to come here, I'm sure you all know the rules. I won't waste everyone's time by talking nonsense. 300 spiritual jade per person, and you may enter. 300 spiritual jades. It didn't sound like a lot. If it was on the Heaven Step Island, it would only be a small number, but this was the ancient small world. The scarcity of spiritual jades was far greater than that on the Heaven Step Island. For the majority of people, this was already a sky-high price. The key point was that it wasn't guaranteed to find the divine knowledge fruit, but simply an admission ticket. 300 spiritual jades for an admission ticket was already extravagant to a certain extent. Even in the entire ancient small world, there wouldn't be many people who could afford this price. From this, it could be seen that the quality of the people present, even if they weren't absolutely tyrannical in terms of strength, at least their identity and status were absolutely unquestionable. As Marquis' voice fell, most people didn't have any strange expressions, but a few people's expressions changed, including Ling Tianyu. Isn't it 200 spiritual jades? How did it suddenly become 300? Ling Tianyu had a pained expression. Young sect master Ling. Don't you know that this rule has been changed since last year? Marquis explained. I really didn't know. Ling Tianyu couldn't help but smile bitterly. In the past, he had always come with his master. It was only last year that he didn't come, because he was participating in the secular world's training. This time, his master just happened to be in seclusion to heal his injuries, so he didn't know about this matter at all. Ho, how rare, how rare. The dignified young sect master of the Thousand Blades sect can't even take out 300 spiritual jades, right? Today I've really widened my horizons. No wonder your Thousand Blades sect is on the decline. And you still have the nerve to call it the revival of the Thousand Blades sect? If you can't even take out this little bit of spiritual jades, I advise you to quickly go back to the countryside and farm. If you rely on the heavens to make a living, you might even be able to become a small landlord. A burly man walked over and ridiculed them. Seeing this person, Ling Tianyu's expression darkened. This person was called Wei Yidao, and he was a well-known figure among the younger generation of the Tyrant Blade sect. Since ancient times, the Tyrant Blade sect and the Thousand Blade sect had endless grievances, and there were often conflicts between the two sects, so it was natural for the disciples of the two sects to view each other as enemies. In particular, the two of them had special identities, so they were at loggerheads. If an ordinary person came to ridicule him, with Ling Tianyu's temperament, he would basically ignore them. However, the other party was Wei Yidao. He could ignore the ridicule and ridicule of everyone except for Wei Yidao. Without saying anything, Ling Tianyu immediately threw out a big bag of spiritual jades. With everyone's eyesight, they could see at a glance that there were exactly 400 spiritual jades. Not one more and not one less. Another 100? What? Are you showing off? Wei Yidao still had a ridiculing expression on his face. 400 spiritual jades was indeed not a small amount in the outside world, and it was enough to suppress a large number of people. However, which of the people here was ordinary? Would those who could afford the admission ticket really care about this little bit of spiritual jades? Young sect master Ling, this is for two people? Marquis Yu understood Ling Tianyu's meaning. In order to repay his life-saving grace, Ling Tianyu had specially invited Lin Yi to Taishi Island this time. Naturally, he had also paid for the admission ticket. Otherwise it would be too stingy. That's right, but I didn't expect it to become 300. Ling Tianyu could only smile bitterly. Other than this bag, he had also put some on the flying spiritual beasts. But it was not as much as 200. This time, he was really in a difficult position. He had properly repaid his debt of gratitude, but instead, he had become a joke. So that's how it is. Then it's a little troublesome. Marquis Yu pinched his chin somewhat awkwardly. This was not the first time Ling Tianyu had come here, and he could be considered an old acquaintance. Moreover, his relationship with the Thousand Blades faction had always been good. However, this was a different matter. He couldn't possibly deduct Ling Tianyu's 200 spiritual jades just because of this, right? Firstly, he didn't have the authority to do so. Secondly, there were so many pairs of eyes watching. Once this precedent was set, there would be no lack of trouble in the future. His friendship with Ling Tianyu had not reached that point yet. Chapter 5400. He and Ling Tianyu were destined to be arch-enemies from the moment they were born. Although Wei Yidao's talent and strength were definitely not bad, it was a pity that his opponent was Ling Tianyu. In front of a super genius like Thousand Flying Blades, everything would be overshadowed, including Wei Yidao. In the past, he was suppressed by Ling Tianyu to the point where he couldn't even raise his head. Now that he had a rare opportunity, Wei Yidao naturally wouldn't let it go. As soon as he said this, the surrounding people also revealed mocking expressions, as if they were watching a good show. Some of them even cooperated and sneered. No matter where they stood, it was always a good thing to be able to see a super genius like Ling Tianyu embarrass himself. In any case, Wei Yidao was the one who stood out, so they were happy to add fuel to the fire. Ling Tianyu originally didn't want to waste his breath on Wei Yidao, but now that he had become the target of public criticism, especially in front of Lin Yi, he couldn't keep his face any longer. He said in a deep voice, "Wei Yidao, this isn't the Middle Island. Tai Snake Island doesn't have a rule that forbids disciples of immemorial sects from fighting in public. In other words, if you continue to talk nonsense, I won't be polite." Really? Then let's see what happens. Wei Yidao's eyelids twitched. In terms of level, he was at the great perfection of Foundation Establishment realm, so he was a head above Ling Tianyu. However, the problem was that the other party was in existence that defied common sense. He was very clear that it was impossible for him to block Ling Tianyu's 1,000 flying blades. However, this didn't mean that he was really afraid of Ling Tianyu. If there were only the two of them here, he might really be scared. However, there were so many outsiders here. If Ling Tianyu really attacked him in public, this matter would definitely be spread to the Middle Island. Even if Tai Snake Island didn't have a rule that forbids private fights, it would definitely infuriate the entire Tyrant's Blade sect. The Thousand Blades sect was once powerful, But now it was just an ordinary sect. Its strength was almost on par with the Tyrant's Blade sect, and it might even be inferior. With the hundreds of years of old grudges between the two sects, if the new enmity of the chief disciple was added, there would definitely be a big fight. The Thousand Blades sect couldn't bear the consequences. As the young master of the Thousand Blades sect, Ling Tianyu shouldered the heavy responsibility of reviving the sect. Wei Yidao was very clear that he didn't have the courage. Do you really think I wouldn't dare? Ling Tianyu's killing intent surged. If it was in the past, he would indeed be a little overcautious. He believed that as long as he matured, he would definitely be able to revive the Thousand Blades sect. There was no need to look for trouble for a moment of anger. However, these thoughts were thrown to the back of his mind after he saw Lin Yi. Lin Yi's appearance caused him to suddenly realize that there was always someone better out there, and he wasn't the only super genius in the world. If he continued to be afraid of the slightest thing, then he would be left behind by the others sooner or later, and the gap between them would only grow larger and larger. How could he talk about the great cause of rejuvenation then? All geniuses had high aspirations, especially for a super genius like Ling Tianyu. Once he made a decision, a person like Wei Yidao would be a dead man in his eyes. Seeing Ling Tianyu like this, Wei Yidao's heart couldn't help but thump. He was originally very sure that Ling Tianyu wouldn't dare to make a move against him in public, but now he really wasn't so sure. If this fellow Ling Tianyu really became ruthless, it would be very frightening. Young Master Ling, you can try. At this time, the old man standing beside Wei Yidao spoke. This person was called Lin Zhen, and he was one of the top 5 high-level elders in the Tyrant's Blade sect. His strength was at the late stage of the Gold Core realm. No matter how terrifying Ling Tianyu's flying Thousand Blades technique was, it was still not enough in front of a late-stage Gold Core realm expert like him. Ling Tianyu's position in the Thousand Blades sect was far more important than Wei Yidao's position in the Tyrant's Blade sect. Once something happened to Ling Tianyu, the entire Thousand Blades sect would go hysterical. At that time, they would definitely take revenge on the Tyrant's Blade sect. However, Lin Zhen couldn't sit by and watch Ling Tianyu bully Wei Yidao. If Ling Tianyu really wanted to make a move, he would have to go through him first. I've long heard that Elder Lin has comprehended the 5th layer of the Tyrant's Blade technique. Today, I can experience it for myself. Ling Tianyu grinned. If it was any other Foundation Establishment realm expert, facing a late-stage Gold Core realm expert, their legs would have already turned to jelly. However, he wasn't afraid at all. After all, his usual sparring partners were at this level, and he was already used to it. How dare you? Lin Zhen's face darkened. Being looked down upon by a junior at the peak of the late-stage Foundation Establishment realm, even if the opponent was the famous Flying Thousand Blades technique, and Ling Tianyu, this feeling was still very unpleasant and infuriating. Lin Zhen was about to make a move. At this time, Marquis Yu finally intervened and said, "Everyone, please wait a moment. Although my Tai Snake Island doesn't prohibit people from fighting each other, this place is not very suitable. After all, I am still waiting to collect the entrance spiritual jades. If you have any grudges, why don't you settle it after we enter? All right, since Steward Yu has spoken, I will definitely give you face." Lin Zhen immediately made use of this opportunity to get out of the situation. He originally didn't want to make a move on Ling Tianyu. Moreover, Marquis Yu's position on this Tai Snake Island was equivalent to half a master. Not to mention him, an elder of the Tyrant's Blade sect. Even the head of the Tyrant's Blade sect had to show some respect. In that case, let's go in first. Ling Tianyu also took a step back. Go in. Hee, young Master Ling. Are you going to go in alone? Or are you going to bring your friend along? You brought him from afar. But in the end, because of the lack of spiritual jades, he could only stand outside and wait. You are playing us like monkeys. It is really an honor to be your friend. Wei Yidao didn't forget to make sarcastic remarks. Ling Tianyu's expression was very ugly, but the other party was speaking the truth. Since things had come to this, he could only grit his teeth and say, "Brother Lin, this time I didn't prepare well enough and let you see a joke. How about this, you go in alone this time? I will go back to the Thousand Blades sect to collect the spiritual jades, and come back again. Although it was a little embarrassing, and he would inevitably be laughed at, this was the only way he could think of to deal with the situation. No need. Lin Yi swept his gaze across the crowd, and his gaze stopped on Wei Yidao, who was waiting to see a joke. He suddenly smiled and said, "Brother Ling, you worry too much. I have already received your kind intentions. However, you should have heard that the thing I am least lacking in is spiritual jades. Let me handle this bit of spiritual jades." After saying this, Lin Yi pointed behind him. Only then did the crowd notice that there was a bag of spiritual jades behind him. Moreover, it looked like there was quite a lot of spiritual jades. For a moment, the crowd thought they were seeing things. Such a big bag of spiritual jades had been thrown on the ground, and they actually didn't notice it at all. There are 500 spiritual jades here, including the 400 from young Master Ling. There is a total of 900 spiritual jades. Just enough for 3 people to enter? Marquis Yu glanced at Lin Yi and Ling Tianyu. Then his gaze fell on Bing Wuqing. Chapter 5401. As soon as she said this, Ling Tianyu's expression became a little strange. Wei Yidao sneered. "Entrance spiritual jades for 3 people? If I didn't hear wrongly, you are counting on Ling Tianyu to treat us, right? But I remember that most Archean sects only have 2 places. When did the Thousand Blades sect become so powerful?" "Really?" Lin Yi turned to look at Ling Tianyu. "Yes. The Tai Snake Island trial is different from the other trials in the Archean Alliance. It is never open to the public, and only a few people know about it. The number of places is limited, and it is a very strict one-to-one transfer system. Once your place is transferred, even if it is only temporary, you are not qualified to enter the Tai Snake Island trial before the place is returned. My Thousand Blades sect only has 2 places, me and my master. But this time my master is injured and in seclusion, so his place can be used by Brother Lin, but..." Ling Tianyu looked at Bing Wuqing awkwardly. From the beginning, Bing Wuqing's appearance was beyond his expectations. He didn't expect that Lin Yi would not treat Bing Wuqing as an outsider and bring her here. He didn't even feel embarrassed to stop her. With Ling Tianyu's status, it wouldn't be a big deal if it was just an extra 300 pieces of spirit jades. Although it wasn't a small amount, the Thousand Blades sect's foundation wasn't something they couldn't afford. The key was the qualification to enter. There were only 2 people in the entire Thousand Blades sect, and they couldn't just let Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing enter, while he, Ling Tianyu, stood aside, right? In that case, I'll go back to Middle Island first. Bing Wuqing was not an unreasonable person. Even from Lin Yi's point of view, she couldn't let things get too awkward. Although the divine knowledge fruit was indeed coveted, she was now with Lin Yi, so she really didn't care too much about it. After all, a golden nascent gathering pill that Lin Yi casually gave her was comparable to a divine knowledge fruit. "Thank you for your understanding, Brother Bing." Ling Tianyu was a little moved. As a super genius, he knew that it was extremely rare for Bing Wuqing to say such words. Even if she did it for Lin Yi's sake, he had no choice but to accept this favor. "Haha, I say, young sect leader Ling, to be friends with you is really the greatest misfortune of my ancestors. They came all the way to Taishi Island, only to be chased back with their tails between their legs. Moreover, I heard that Bing Wuqing is now a nascent soul-old monster. You really have a lot of face." Wei Yidao took the opportunity to sow discord. Although the Snow Sword faction and the Thousand Blades faction were not at odds with each other, they had never been on good terms with each other. To be honest, he and Lin Jun were a little flustered when they saw Bing Wuqing and Ling Tianyu standing together. At this moment, it was only natural for them to stab each other in the back. Nascent soul-old monsters had a special meaning in the small immemorial Jianghu. As the highest combat power of each sect, their every move represented not only themselves, but also the sect behind them. If Bing Wuqing was really rejected today, it would not only be her, but also the entire Snow Sword faction that would be humiliated. In the eyes of others, Bing Wuqing was simply fooled by Ling Tianyu. Ling Tianyu felt very apologetic in his heart. If he had known this earlier, he would have made things clear on the middle island. Then he would not have fallen into such an awkward situation. Now it was hard to get off the tiger. Being mocked by Wei Yidao and the others, Bing Wuqing could not sympathize with them even if she wanted to. In that case, Brother Lin and Brother Bing will go in this time. Anyway, there will be opportunities in the future. I will come again next time. Ling Tianyu finally gritted his teeth and said, this was the only way. Otherwise, if he really forced Bing Wuqing to go back awkwardly, it would turn a good thing into a bad thing. Not only would they not end up well, but they would also become enemies. That's good too. Marquis Yu nodded. From his standpoint, it was impossible for him to open a back door for Ling Tianyu. As long as he did not break the rules of the Tai Snake Island trial, everything else did not matter. Io, sacrificing yourself for others. Young sect leader Ling has quite a high level of awareness. Wei Yidao gloated. Ling Tianyu did not say anything on the surface, but his expression was very gloomy. No one would be happy about this, especially when there was such a rival who kept mocking him. He was already considered to have a good temper, if he could suppress his anger. If he continued to stay, people would continue to mock him. Ling Tianyu immediately wanted to leave, but he was stopped by Lin Yi. Brother Ling, you don't have to go. Huh? Ling Tianyu frowned and couldn't help but look at Bing Wuqing. Did Lin Yi mean to let Bing Wuqing go? Bing Wuqing was very tactful. She did not particularly care about this matter. She nodded at Lin Yi and turned to leave. In the end, she was stopped by Lin Yi. Brother Lin, you want to withdraw? That won't do. Ling Tianyu hurriedly interrupted. His main purpose this time was to repay Lin Yi for saving his life. If he made Lin Yi withdraw in the end, it would be pointless. No, Brother Ling, you are thinking too much. Lin Yi smiled and turned to Marquis Yu. Caretaker Yu, you see, the three of us have come all the way here. It is not appropriate to let anyone leave. There must be a solution to this matter, right? What do you mean? If you have something to say, you can say it directly. Marquis Yu narrowed his eyes. Since Taishi Island has this trial, and since it is a trial that charges admission, there must be room to fight for it. Therefore, I want to buy an admission qualification, Lin Yi said straightforwardly. Buy an admission qualification? Everyone present was instantly stunned. Everyone knew that the admission qualification to Taishi Island could only be inherited or transferred. This was the first time that someone had openly proposed to buy an admission qualification. What kind of nonsense are you talking about? Do you really think that you can do anything with some spiritual jades? You even want to buy an admission qualification? Are you daydreaming? Wei Yidao immediately grinned coldly. Not only him, but all the other people present also had mocking expressions on their faces. The qualification to enter the Tai Snake Island for the trial was rare, which was why it was so precious. That was why people like them were a cut above the rest. If it could be bought so easily, what would be so precious about it? Everyone thought that Marquis Yu would reject it immediately, and even teach this arrogant guy a lesson. In the end, they heard him say slowly, "That is very expensive." Very expensive. In other words, it could be bought. However, the price was very high. It would definitely not be as low as 300 spiritual jades. Understandable. Lin Yi nodded. This was already within his expectations. Since Taishi Island's trial required an admission fee of spiritual jades, it meant that to a certain extent, it was similar to a merchant doing business. It could be regarded as a tourist attraction that charged admission fees. However, this tourist attraction was a little special. It was a strictly private membership system. Chapter 5402. That price is not something an average person can afford. Even a normal immemorial sect does not have the financial capability to do so. Are you sure you want to buy it? Marquis Yu took a deep look at Lin Yi. If this matter was really successful, it would be an unprecedentedly big business. Tai Snake Island had not met such a big customer for over 100 years. However, he had never heard of the rumors of Lin Yi. In the past, he did not even know of this person's existence, so he was mostly suspicious of him. Name your price, Lin Yi said indifferently. This tone shocked everyone for a moment. Then, they all revealed a mocking expression. Manager, you had already said it clearly. Even if a normal immemorial sect tried their best, they would not be able to afford the entry qualification. Otherwise, the trial of Tai Snake Island would not be as unknown as it was today. Even if the Azure Cloud sect of the Northern Island was one of the 10 small sects and clans, it would still be very strenuous. This guy actually behaved so casually. Wasn't he being too pretentious? Marquis also revealed a surprised expression. His already long and narrow eyes narrowed into slits. The corner of his mouth curled as he spat out 2 words. 100 times. Hearing this, everyone present collectively sucked in a breath of cold air. 100 times, naturally referred to 100 times the entry price. That would be a whole 30,000 spiritual jades. This was not the heavenly island. 30,000 spiritual jades was already an extremely high price. Just like what Marquis had said, a normal immemorial sect would not be able to afford it. Everyone could not help but secretly rejoice. Fortunately, their entry qualification was passed down from their fathers. Otherwise, even if they saved up for a lifetime, they would not be able to afford it. Hearing this number, even Lin Yi could not help but reveal a surprised expression. 30,000 spiritual jades. This was really a little too high. 30,000 spiritual jades is not a small amount. It is really not something an ordinary person can afford. In fact, the number of trial qualifications that have been sold in the history of Tai Snake Island can be counted on one hand. Most of them obtained the qualification because of one reason or another. Then it was passed down to you from generation to generation. You should give up on this idea. Marquis looked at Lin Yi's expression and knew that Lin Yi would definitely not be able to afford it. After all, if one's wealth was so strong, they would not need anything else. Just this alone would allow them to stand at the top of the small immemorial martial world. And he knew every single one of those people like the back of his hand. It was impossible that he had not heard of them. What did I say? A toad lusting after swan meat. That's 30,000 spiritual jades. You want to buy it just like that. Do you really think you are the god of fortune? Brother, you should just admit that you're unlucky to have a friend like young sect master Ling. Why are you wasting everyone's time here? Wei Yidao still didn't forget to continue to provoke and add insult to injury. Lin Yi ignored him and continued to look at Marquis Yu. I want to know, why is this trial qualification worth 30,000 spiritual jades? Is it just because there is a chance to find the consciousness fruit? Although the consciousness fruit was not cheap, even if there was a ready-made one in front of them, it would definitely not be worth the astronomical price of 30,000 spiritual jades. At least in the small immemorial martial world, no one would be willing to pay such a price. Moreover, it was not ready-made. There was only a small chance. Strictly speaking, even this chance was not big. Otherwise, the consciousness fruit would be everywhere. Of course, the consciousness fruit is the signature of Tai Snake Island's trial. However, it is not the only signature. Since Tai Snake Island dares to offer such a price, it is naturally worth it. We will definitely not let anyone suffer a loss. Of course, if we give the chance and we cannot grasp it, then it is not our problem. Marquis swept his gaze across the crowd and said. As soon as he finished, everyone subconsciously looked at each other. They had come here for the consciousness fruit. It was true that Tai Snake Island was a unique place in the small immemorial martial world. There were indeed some treasures of heaven and earth that could not be found in other places. However, those that could be compared to the consciousness fruit were few and far between. However, from what Marquis had said, Tai Snake Island should have other extremely rare treasures of heaven and earth. Moreover, it was a treasure that was at least at the level of the consciousness fruit. What could it be? Marquis obviously wanted to keep them in suspense. Everyone was extremely tempted by the suspense. In the past, they had come here to look for the consciousness fruit. It seemed that they had to change their thinking this time and investigate other things. In that case, let's buy one. Lin Yi's words immediately shocked a large group of people. Each of them had a strange look on their faces. 30,000 spiritual jades piled together was a huge box. Looking at his empty hands, where did he get 30,000 spiritual jades? It should be known that the small immemorial martial world was not like the Heaven Stage Island. because spiritual jades were very rare. The value of a single piece was far more valuable than on the Heaven Stage Island. Even if it was a large transaction with a sky-high price, it would at most be a box of spiritual jades. It was just that the box was a little bigger. Therefore, there was no such thing as a spiritual jade card. After all, there was not a need for it. Oh, where are the spiritual jades? Marquis was also stunned. He thought that the other party would say something like delaying the transaction. It was very normal to specially make a trip for 30,000 spiritual jades. Here, it's on the flying spirit beast. Lenny turned around and moved a huge box from the back of the flying spirit beast. The others were only surprised when they saw this scene. But Ling Tianyo's eyeballs almost fell out. He came here with Lenny, so he knew exactly how many things were on the back of the flying spirit beast. When did such a huge box of spiritual jades appear? He had no idea at all. In contrast, Bing Wuqing was much calmer. Although she also could not understand where Lenny had come from, she had a much deeper understanding of Lin Yi's various miracles than Ling Tianyu and the others. No matter what earth-shattering things Lenny did, she would not be too surprised. No more, no less. Exactly 30,000 spiritual jades. Marquis counted, and a rare smile appeared on his face. Even the way he looked at Lin, he was no longer as unapproachable as before. His attitude was starting to be as amiable and approachable as before. Regardless of his identity or status, 30,000 spiritual jades was a huge income. No matter how experienced he was in the Immemorial Alliance, Marquis was still a human after all. But as long as he was a human, a god of wealth like Lin, he would always get some preferential treatment. With this, everyone, including Wei Yidao, was collectively silent. He had spent 30,000 spiritual jades in one go. This nouveau riche had reached a certain level. Ordinary people really did not have the confidence to challenge Lenny face to face. Chapter 5403. Everyone immediately began to line up. Lenny, Ling Tianyu, and Bing Wuqing happened to be in front of Wei Yidao. Wei Yidao was shocked speechless by the 30,000 spiritual jades, but now he frowned again. What's so great about paying 30,000 spiritual jades? You can line up ahead of me. I say, why don't the three of you go in directly? This was a sarcastic remark, but Lenny glanced at him and turned to Marquis. Caretaker, can we go in directly? It doesn't matter if we pay a little more spiritual jades. Sure. Marquis was very straightforward and directly opened the green passage for them. Seeing Lin Yi and the other two leave first, Wei Yidao's face turned green. Unfortunately, he didn't dare to say anything in front of Marquis and could only endure it. After entering the trial ground, Ling Tianyu introduced to Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing. The terrain of Tai Snake Island is clear at a glance. The snake's tail is the only entrance and exit. As long as you keep walking along the snake's body, you can finally reach the snake's head. However, there are very few people who can actually reach there. It's too difficult. Why? If it's just to go to the snake's head, can't we just go there by flying spirit beast? What's so difficult about that? Lenny asked curiously. Brother Lin, you don't know this, but the entire Tai Snake Island is enveloped by a very special primordial formation. It is said that it is very likely to be the protective formation of Tai Snake itself. Flying spirit beasts can't fly above it at all. Even if they force their way in, it is extremely dangerous. If flying spirit beasts can't do it, is it difficult to walk on the ground? Bing Wuqing asked. It's very difficult. There are dangers everywhere along the way. Spirit beasts and traps can take away the life of a golden core expert at any time. The trial on Tai Snake Island is not only the most secret trial in the immemorial underworld, but also the most dangerous one. Although I can't be compared to the two of you, logically speaking, my strength is not bad, right? Ling Tianyu asked. Not bad. Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing shook their heads at the same time. Putting aside his terrifying potential for growth, Ling Tianyu's current strength was by no means weak. With his cultivation at the peak of the late stage of foundation building, he was comparable to an ordinary early-stage gold elixir cultivator. In theory, He was strong enough to handle most of the trials in the immemorial Jianghu. Ling Tianyu smiled bitterly and said, "Then you definitely can't imagine it. The last few times I came here, I would encounter dozens of dangers every time. It was my master who pulled me back from the edge of life and death. Now I'm more familiar with this place, and have some experience. That's why I'm slightly better now." So cruel. Even Lin Yi's eyelids couldn't help but twitch. He was well aware of Ling Tianyu's strength. He was able to escape from Shui Jianfeng, a newly advanced nascent soul-old monster, twice with his cultivation of peak late foundation establishment. This was enough to show that this person was extraordinary. That's right, twice. The first time was when he was saved by Lin Yi in the immemorial Jianghu, and the second time was when everyone returned to the immemorial Jianghu. Although Ling Tianyu didn't say it in detail, it was impossible for Shui Jianfeng to let him go so easily. But he still returned to the Thousand Blades faction safely, which showed that this was no small matter. Such a ruthless person was actually almost scared to death by Tai Snake Island. It was really unexpected. Of course, with Brother Lin and Brother Bing's strength, this little danger is nothing. You just need to be a little more careful. Ling Tianyu shook his head and laughed. He didn't know exactly how strong Lin Yi was, but from Bing Wuqing's attitude, he was sure that Lin Yi was at least above an ordinary nascent soul-old monster. Such a person could go unhindered in the entire immemorial Jianghu, let alone a mere Tai Snake Island. Let's talk about the spirit knowledge fruit. What does it look like, and what habits it has? You have to tell us. Lin Yi smiled and said, "Although Marquis, you had just fooled everyone outside, it was still unknown how much of it was true, and how much of it was fake. The people who came here would at most be more cautious. The main focus would definitely be on the consciousness fruit, and Lin Yi was no exception. Actually, I don't know what it looks like in reality, because I've never seen it before. My understanding of the spirit knowledge fruit comes from ancient books, and my master. It is said that the spirit knowledge fruit has a deep relationship with the Tai Snake clan. There is a saying that it is a part of the Tai Snake's body, and its appearance is very similar to a snake's gallbladder. In other words, the spirit knowledge fruit looks like a snake's gallbladder," Ling Tianyu explained. "In that case, it's still quite recognizable." Lin Yi nodded. The most annoying thing when looking for treasures of heaven and earth was the lack of recognition. At first glance, it looked no different from weeds. That was really a pain in the ass. That's true. But it's a pity that the spirit knowledge fruit is still very hard to find. Ling Tianyu smiled bitterly and spread his hands. "I've been to this place 4 times, from the snake's tail to the snake's head countless times, but I still haven't found anything. You can imagine the rarity of the spirit knowledge fruit. Just now, didn't that manager you say that there is no time limit? As long as you want to, you can stay here and continue looking? If you come again, you have to pay the entrance spirit jade again. Why do you still want to go out?" Bing Wuqing interrupted and asked. "That is indeed the rule, but not many people will do that. As for the reason, why don't the two of you take a closer look?" Ling Tianyu kept them in suspense. Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing looked at each other, and for the first time, they began to sense the surrounding environment. After a while, Bing Wuqing frowned slightly. "The concentration of spiritual energy in this place is lower than outside. That's strange. Logically speaking, the rarer the ancient trial ground, the higher the concentration of spiritual energy. Only then can it nourish all kinds of treasures of heaven and earth. Why is it that this place is even worse than an ordinary place? This is still the snake's tail. The closer one is to the snake's head, the lower the concentration of spiritual energy. When one reaches the snake's head, there is almost no spiritual energy at all. It's no different from the secular world," Ling Tianyu added. "But even if the spiritual energy here is a little thin, it's not impossible if one has the heart to persevere, right?" Bing Wuqing was a little doubtful. In terms of the thinness of spiritual energy, no place could be compared to the secular world, which was known as the graveyard of spiritual energy. It was true that everyone's daily cultivation was inseparable from spiritual energy, but if one really had the heart to persevere, One could even persevere in the secular world until the end of time, let alone on Tai Snake Island. It's not just the spiritual energy here. Lenny shook his head and sensed the surroundings. Apart from the spiritual energy, there is also an extremely faint fishy smell in this place. I don't know what it is exactly, but if one stays here for a long time, it's very likely that one will be poisoned slowly. Am I right? Chapter 5404. Most of them only noticed it after staying here for a long time and showing symptoms of being poisoned. There are very few people like Brother Lin who can see through it with just a glance. Your perception is truly unparalleled. Ling Tianyu praised sincerely. This was the truth. Lin Yi's perception was outstanding, and now that he had transformed into a primordial spirit, it was even more acute. He could immediately see through anything strange around him. You flatter me. Lin Yi smiled faintly. How harmful is this snake smell? Bing Wuqing asked. It's really not that harmful. After the symptoms of chronic poisoning appear, as long as you leave Tai Snake Island as soon as possible, the symptoms will disappear, Ling Tianyu said. What if you continue to stay here? Bing Wuqing asked again. The symptoms will get worse and worse, and when it reaches a certain level, you will be finished. There is no antidote for this snake smell. It can only cure itself when the symptoms are still mild. In the past, some people didn't believe in it, and in the end, they all became victims of this Tai Snake Island. These are all examples. Ling Tianyu sighed. Speaking of which, since the probability of finding the spirit knowledge fruit is so small, why did you bring us here? Lin Yi changed the topic. He had spent 30,000 spiritual jades for this. Although this amount of spiritual jades was nothing to him, it was not something that could be casually thrown away. However, if they could really find the spirit knowledge fruit, then let alone 30,000 spiritual jades, even 100,000 spiritual jades would be absolutely worth it for Lin Yi. After all, it was the same spirit knowledge fruit, but its significance to him and to others was completely different. How could a profound ascending stage expert be compared to a foundation establishment stage expert? Ling Tianyu smiled bitterly. He had originally planned to use this opportunity to return a favor to Lin Yi. Who would have thought that things would develop like this? Lin Yi actually took out 30,000 spiritual jades on the spot to buy an admission ticket. In this way, if he couldn't find the divine knowledge fruit this time, forget about repaying the favor. In a way, it could be said that he had cheated Lin Yi, spending 30,000 spirit jades for nothing. How could this be justified? But now that things had come to this, it was too late to say anything. Ling Tianyu could only say, Brother Lin, the spiritual knowledge fruit is indeed difficult to find. My master and I have thought of countless ways to find it, but it's not that we have no harvest at all. I'm all ears. Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing's interest was piqued. Although my master and I did not find the spiritual knowledge fruit, after spending so much time and effort on Taishi Island, we have already eliminated most of the places. There is only one place we have not been to, Ling Tianyu said in a low voice. Elimination? In other words, if there is really a spiritual knowledge fruit in this place, that place has the highest possibility of finding it. Is this what you mean? Ling Yi's eyes lit up. Yes. Of course, this is just my wishful thinking. It's hard to say how high the probability is. It's very likely that we will still rejoice in vain when we get there. Ling Tianyu deliberately gave Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing a warning shot. Understood. Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing nodded in unison. Neither of them were the kind of people who were stupid towards rare treasures like the spiritual knowledge fruit. They had always held an attitude of, if we get it, then it's fate. They would not be too insistent on it. Then shall I bring you there? Ling Tianyu glanced behind him. While they were talking, Wei Yidao and the others had already started to enter. For this kind of thing, the fewer the people the better. Once there were too many people, and they had attracted so much attention just now, it would be troublesome if someone with ulterior motives followed them. The three of them quickly moved forward along the narrow and winding path. This place was full of danger. If it was someone else, they would definitely not dare to move so fast. However, their team not only had Ling Tianyu, who was very familiar with the way as a guide, but more importantly, they had Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing, two powerful existences, who could be considered top-notch in the immemorial martial world. Therefore, they did not need to worry about this little bit of danger. However, very soon, Lin Yi felt that something was wrong. What's wrong? Seeing that Lin Yi had suddenly slowed down, Ling Tianyu and Bing Wuqing were stunned at the same time. Don't you feel that it's a little strange? Lin Yi asked. The two of them looked at each other, and then shook their heads at the same time. No. Both of them were super geniuses, and their senses were far more sensitive than ordinary people. Ling Tianyu's level was indeed a little low, but Bing Wuqing was now an expert at the peak of the early nascent soul realm. If there was really any danger here, it was impossible that she would not be able to sense it at all. However, it was Lin Yi who said this. It was not surprising that Lin Yi could sense something that they could not sense. I have a feeling that there's a knife on my back. Lin Yi looked around. His divine sense clearly told him that there were no other cultivators following them within a few miles, and there were no signs of any spirit beasts either. However, the feeling of being stared at by someone was very strong. Lin Yi's intuition had never been wrong, especially now that his primordial spirit had reached the mysterious ascension stage. Then what should we do? Ling Tianyu asked. He did not have the slightest doubt. After all, the other party's strength was much higher than his. Moreover, Lin Yi was not a person who spoke without thinking. He would not deliberately mystify things and make such a joke. Find it out and kill it. This was Bing Wuqing's attitude, and it was also her usual style, simple and neat. Not for the time being. This guy is not ordinary, and it's not easy to reverse track its position. Moreover, I can feel that it is not specifically staring at the three of us. Looking at the extremely scattered posture of its divine sense, maybe everyone who entered the Tai Snake Island for the trial is its target. Let's wait and see first. Once it makes any moves, it will definitely reveal its fox tail, Lin Yi said. Okay. Ling Tianyu did not have any objection, although Bing Wuqing advocated killing the other party immediately. Since Lin Yi had said so, he naturally would not disobey. The key was that he did not have the ability to do so. The three of them continued to move forward, inexplicably feeling a little more pressure than before. No matter where the other party came from, being able to stare at a yuanying stage-old monster, like Bing Wuqing, without anyone noticing, was enough to prove that the other party was unfathomable. Fortunately, Lin Yi was standing beside them. Otherwise, the two of them would not be aware of it, just like the others. Brother Lin, what do you think this guy's background is? Don't tell me he has been hiding in Tai Snake Island and plotting something big. Ling Tianyu could not help but ask after holding back for a long time. When he thought that there was such a guy hiding in Tai Snake Island, he could not help but break into a cold sweat. Chapter 5405. It's hard to say, but one thing for sure is that this guy's deific consciousness is at a very high level. Lin Yi paused, looked at the two and added, higher than the average nascent soul-old monster. As soon as he said this, Ling Tianyu and Bing Wuqing immediately fell silent. Nascent soul-old monsters were already at the top of the immemorial underworld, and this guy's deific consciousness was higher than the average nascent soul-old monsters. Wouldn't that mean that he had the highest combat power in the immemorial underworld? This small Tai Snake Island actually had so many crouching tigers and hidden dragons. It was simply incredible. The three continued to move forward for nearly an hour. At this time, they were already deep in the hinterland of Tai Snake Island, and they had crossed a clear path. They were already in a very remote place at the edge, and even Lin Yi could hear the sound of waves crashing against the reefs. We're here. Ling Tianyu stopped. Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing were stunned at the same time. In front of them was not the deep mountains and dense forests they had imagined, nor was it a dangerous place. Instead, it was so empty that it made them feel excited, because in front of them was the sea, and under their feet was a cliff that was dozens of feet high. Here. Bing Wuqing frowned. This place was full of bare rocks, and everything could be seen at a glance. It didn't look like a place where deific consciousness fruits could grow at all. Lin Yi was also a little puzzled, but after sensing for a moment, he suddenly raised his eyebrows. There's a cave under the cliff? Brother Lin is wise. Ling Tianyu grinned, and then explained. It was also by chance. The last time I came here with my master, we encountered an armored bone snake. It is one of the most ferocious and terrifying spirit beasts on Tai Snake Island, and its mature strength is close to that of a nascent soul-old monster. Even my master could only run away if he was targeted by it, but that guy is so elusive that we couldn't get rid of it several times. Finally, we were forced to this position, and had no choice but to jump into the sea. There were all kinds of ferocious and terrifying sea beasts in the vast sea of Heaven Stage Island, and it was the same in the immemorial underworld. Normally, no one would jump into the sea unless it was absolutely necessary, especially in a dangerous and remote place like Tai Snake Island. Of course, compared to the armored bone snake in front of them, they had no choice but to jump. And then, Lin Yi motioned for Ling Tianyu to continue. After that, we discovered that there was actually an extremely large cave underneath. The entrance was less than 15 zhang underwater. My master and I swam inside for a while, and when we entered, it was a completely different world. However, there was a strange and dangerous aura lingering inside. My master was injured by the armored bone snake, so he didn't dare to go too deep inside. He only stayed at the entrance for a while before retreating, Ling Tianyu said with a sigh. Interesting. Lin Yi's lips curled into a smile. This Tai Snake Island, from the snake's tail to the snake's head, not only me and my master, but also the other cultivators have been sifted countless times. If there really is a spiritual knowledge fruit, it would have been taken away long ago. Only that unknown cave is a blank area that everyone has missed. Ling Tianyu grinned excitedly. If it weren't for the fact that their strength was too low, and they were frightened by the armored bone snake, Ling Tianyu and his master would have already sifted through the cave below. After all, it was related to the spiritual knowledge fruit, and anyone who came here would be tempted. Then what are you waiting for? Lin Yi glanced at the two of them, and was about to take the lead to go down. Brother Lin, wait a moment. Ling Tianyu hurriedly stopped him. What? Brother Ling, do you have any other things to take note of? Lin Yi turned to look at him. No, with Brother Lin and Brother Bing's strength, there is nothing to be afraid of even if there is a mountain of knives, or a sea of fire down below. But, Ling Tianyu paused and shook his head. I actually didn't plan to go down this time. Oh. Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing couldn't help but look at each other. According to what the other party said, the spiritual knowledge fruit was likely to be in this huge cave below. They had obviously come here, but they didn't plan to go down. What the hell was going on? As the saying went, it was hard to know what was in a man's heart. Although Lin Yi had saved Ling Tianyu's life, no one knew what the other party was planning. This time, the Taishi Island trial might really be to repay his kindness, or it might just be a trap. No one could say for sure. No matter how they looked at it, it was a bit abrupt for Ling Tianyu to retreat at this time. Please don't misunderstand. I don't have any intention of harming the two of you. Even if we take 10,000 steps back, with the strength of the two of you, do you think others can trick you? Ling Tianyu hurriedly clarified with a bitter smile. Brother Ling, don't worry. I believe you won't harm us. Lin Yi nodded. Frankly speaking, he didn't believe in Ling Tianyu's character, but purely believed in his and Bing Wuqing's strength. After all, no matter what kind of trap it was, if the other party really wanted to trick them, there must be a nascent soul-old monster. And there must be a lot of nascent soul-old monsters. Otherwise, only 2 or 3 nascent soul-old monsters would be useless. In the small ancient Jianghu, the movement of any nascent soul-old monster would attract attention. As for gathering more than 3 nascent soul-old monsters at once, it was almost a fantasy. Unless the entire ancient alliance declared war on Lin Yi, it was impossible for a single Ling Tianyu to have such influence. What's more, even if there were so many nascent soul-old monsters, as long as they came to Taishi Island, they couldn't escape Lin Yi's divine sense. Therefore, The possibility of Ling Tianyu setting a trap for them was very small. Thank you. Ling Tianyu was somewhat flattered by Lin Yi's trust, and then said, my purpose in coming to Taishi Island this time is actually different from others. I'm not here for the spiritual knowledge fruit, but to do two things. What two things? Lin Yi asked. One is to bring you here. Whether or not there are spiritual knowledge fruits in this huge cave below, this is a token of my sincerity, and also a small repayment to Brother Lin for saving my life. Ling Tianyu said sincerely. Ling Tianyu said sincerely. From the very beginning, he had never planned to go down with the two of them. It was not only because his strength was too low, but also because he wanted to avoid the awkwardness. If there were really spiritual knowledge fruits down there, and there were only one or two, what should he do? Of course, such thinking was a little groundless. After all, it was still unknown whether there were spiritual knowledge fruits down there or not. Worrying about dividing the spoils at this time, in the eyes of others, was really thinking too much. What about the second thing? Lin Yi continued to ask. Chapter 5406. Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing still didn't know what the snake's head meant, but he had made up his mind to do so. If he hadn't been continuously stimulated by freaks like Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing, he wouldn't have taken such a risk. But now Ling Tianyu was under great pressure. If he didn't push himself hard, then not only Lin Yi, but also Bing Wuqing and Xue Jianfeng would leave him behind forever. As a super genius of the Thousand Flying Blades sect, his pride was destined to never fall behind. Challenge the limit? Lin Yi took a deep look at Ling Tianyu. Although he didn't know the specific situation, he could roughly guess it from his eyes. Lin Yi immediately said, I understand, but it doesn't conflict with you going down with us. Even if it's to challenge the limit, we can wait until we come up. If we can really find the divine consciousness fruit, we can share it equally. If it's not enough, I'll compensate with spiritual jades. I appreciate Brother Lin's kindness, but I've made up my mind. Brother Lin, you don't have to persuade me anymore. We'll meet again. Ling Tianyu cupped his hands at Lin Yi and Bing Wuqing, and then turned to leave. After watching Ling Tianyu leave, Bing Wuqing suddenly said, It seems that this guy has been greatly stimulated. Excellent talent, strong will. And although not tactful, he's remarkable. If nothing goes wrong, he will become a great person in the future. Lin Yi said thoughtfully. He rarely evaluated others, and this was already an extremely high evaluation. Bing Wuqing was also a person with unlimited potential. But in the long run, in his opinion, it was really hard to say whether she could continue to surpass Ling Tianyu in the future. Of course, now that Bing Wuqing was Lin Yi's follower, Ling Tianyu couldn't compare with all kinds of cultivation resources. If he couldn't make up for the gap in this aspect, the gap in strength between them would only get bigger and bigger. Without saying anything more, the two immediately jumped into the sea and sneaked into the underground cave. Just as Ling Tianyu said, the entrance was less than half a mile away, and the inside suddenly became clear. After coming ashore, they were still about 10 feet from the top of the cave, and the environment was quite spacious. The most amazing thing was that this place was different from what he had imagined. It was actually not completely pitch black. Instead, it was suffused with a gentle green light. It was like a paradise in a fairy tale, enchanting and enchanting. This light, Bing Wuqing couldn't help but furrow her brows. Although the gentle green light around them gave off a magnificent feeling, it gave her a strange sense of danger. Her past experiences had taught her that the more beautiful something was, the more dangerous it was. It seems that this place is often covered by seawater. If I'm not wrong, this place will be completely flooded every time the tide rises. So we don't have much time left. Lin Yi looked around and said. Bing Wuqing glanced at him. She didn't understand what he meant. Look at the glowing things clearly. They are some kind of tiny plankton living in the seawater. Their bodies emit green fluorescence. Look, not only are they everywhere on the ground, but even the top of the cave is covered with them. If it wasn't often covered by seawater, they wouldn't stay here for no reason, not to mention that they are all alive, Lin Yi explained. Yes. Bing Wuching nodded, and was secretly amazed. She had a whole new understanding of Lin Yi's insight. In terms of real strength, all the experts she had met in the past were far inferior to Lin Yi. Once they encountered a problem, they would basically go straight to the point and solve everything with their fists. There were very few people like Lin Yi who paid attention to details. I don't think this place is too big. We should be able to make a rough sweep outside before it gets dark. We can get out before the tide rises. Let's split up and make the best use of our time. Lin Yi decided to split up. After all, Bing Wuching was different from his other lackeys. With her strength at the peak of the early nascent soul realm, she could handle any place in the immemorial underworld with ease. There was no need for her to stay by his side. As for the spirit knowledge fruit, Lin Yi believed that if Bing Wuching really gained something, she wouldn't keep it for herself. He didn't trust her character, but he trusted her intelligence. If it were Xue Jianfeng, he would definitely do something stupid like keeping the spirit knowledge fruit for himself. But Bing Wuching would never do it, because she was a smart person. All right. Bing Wuching didn't hesitate, and immediately chose a direction to search. Lin Yi, on the other hand, chose the opposite direction. Relying on his divine senses that were far superior to ordinary people's, he moved at an extremely fast speed. At first glance, he looked like a shuttling shadow. This underground cave wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. If he didn't speed up, he wouldn't be able to finish searching before the tide rises. In this underground cave, apart from plankton that emitted green fluorescence, the most common thing was seaweed. Apart from that, there was almost no other vegetation, not to mention any large plants. So at first glance, it seemed like he could see everything at a glance. However, this didn't mean that it was easy to find the spirit knowledge fruit. Through Ling Tianyou's description, although Lin Yi already knew what the spirit knowledge fruit looked like, he didn't know whether it was a tree fruit or simply growing on the ground. It was easy to find a tree fruit in this place, but if it grew on the ground and was covered by seaweed, it would be a little troublesome. Before this, Lin Yi quite agreed with Ling Tianyou's judgment, and felt that the legendary spirit knowledge fruit was very likely to grow in this cave. But now he was a little hesitant. If his deduction was right, this cave was often flooded by seawater. Could it be that the spirit knowledge fruit could grow in seawater? In the minds of most people, including Lin Yi, treasures of heaven and earth like the spirit knowledge fruit must grow in a primitive land with abundant spiritual qi. As for growing in seawater, the possibility was really slim. After all, seawater was not very compatible with the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. Once one was shrouded by seawater all year round, the spiritual qi conditions would not be much different from that of the secular world. What kind of treasures of heaven and earth could grow in such an environment? Of course, muttering was just muttering. After all, there were very few people who had actually seen the spirit knowledge fruit. Maybe the spirit knowledge fruit was so strange. After searching in a direction for a while, Lin Yi suddenly stopped halfway. It wasn't because he found the spirit knowledge fruit, but because his divine senses sensed that there were people not far ahead, and there was more than one person. Chapter 5407. There were only two explanations for these people to appear in this place. Either they got the news from Ling Tianyu or his master, or they got the news from other channels. Normally, the latter was more likely to be the case. However, if that was the case, it was worth pondering what kind of channel was behind it. After all, this place was too well hidden. Perhaps even Marquis Yu, an official steward of Taishi Island, did not know about it. It was fine if Ling Tianyu and his master accidentally sneaked in, but if this kind of coincidence happened to two different people at the same time, just thinking about it made people shudder. According to Lin Yi's temperament, since he speculated that there might be something fishy behind this, he naturally had to find a way to figure it out. He immediately stayed where he was and watched the changes. At this distance, he could clearly perceive every move of those people in front of him, but the other party could not perceive him, unless they also had the primordial spirit of the profound ascension stage. There were a total of 4 people. Their strength was not outstanding among the cultivators, who came to Tai Snake Island for the trial, but they were not too weak either. One was at the early gold core stage, one was at the peak of the foundation establishment stage, and the other 2 were at the peak of the late foundation establishment stage. Such a strength configuration was more than enough in other ordinary trials in the small Jianghu, but in this Tai Snake Island, it could only be regarded as passable, quite passable. Even Ling Tianyu and his master were treading on thin ice here, let alone these people in front of them. If they encountered a ferocious spirit beast like the armor-bone snake, this group of people would be completely annihilated, and it would be difficult for them to escape. However, to Lin Yi's surprise, these 4 people with average strength did not seem to be a group. To be precise, they should have been a group, but at this time, they were just fighting among themselves. The 4 people were divided into 2 groups, the early gold core stage and the 2 peak of the late foundation establishment stage formed one group, and the remaining people at the peak of the foundation establishment stage formed the other group. At this moment, the 2 sides were confronting each other. Chu Tianlu, you didn't expect this day to come, did you? One of the peak late foundation establishment stage masters took the lead and sneered. It seemed that he was the core of the group of 3. Even the early gold core stage master was standing behind him, like a follower. Why? The face of the young man called Chu Tianlu was filled with shock and fury. Obviously, he'd never imagined that he would suddenly fall to such a state. As far as he was concerned, the 3 people in front of him weren't irreconcilable enemies at all. Even if they occasionally didn't get along, it was far from to the point where they would fight to the death. After all, the 3 of them were from the same clan, especially this Chu Tianliang, who was standing in front of him. He had an extremely close blood relationship with him, and they were true cousins. In terms of status, they were both the direct descendants of the Chu clan's patriarch. Moreover, they had played together since childhood, and their relationship in the past was quite good. It was only in recent years that they had become somewhat estranged. How could they have fallen to such a state? Why? Hearing this, Chu Tianliang immediately laughed and said with a mocking expression, "My dear cousin, do you really not know why? I remember that you were always very clever when you were young. Every time Grandpa inspected us juniors, you were always the one who was praised. Now that you're in this situation, you can still ask such an idiotic question. Where did your clever brain go?" Chu Tianlu was silent for a moment and slowly said, "For the spiritual knowledge fruit? As the saying goes, people die for wealth, and birds die for food." Killing and robbing people of their treasures had always been the norm in the cultivation world, especially in front of a legendary rare treasure, like the spiritual knowledge fruit. Even brothers falling out and becoming enemies was a very normal thing, not to mention that he and Chu Tianliang were not biological brothers, but only cousins separated by a layer of blood. Speaking of this, we still have to thank you. If you hadn't jumped down on a whim, we wouldn't have been able to find such a good place, let alone the spiritual knowledge fruit. Chu Tianliang and the other 2 looked at each other and smiled. This cave was so hidden that even Lin Yi would find it difficult to find it by searching with his divine sense, let alone them. Lin Yi's heart moved slightly when he heard this, and his attention fell on Chu Tianlu. A whim? If it was like last time when Ling Tianyu and the others were chased by the armored bone snake to the point of no return, it would be fine. Which normal person would suddenly have the idea of jumping into the sea? What the hell was this Chu Tianlu? But we haven't even found the shadow of the spiritual knowledge fruit yet. Isn't it too early to fall out with me? Chu Tianlu asked in reply. He was not a fool. If he had truly discovered the spiritual knowledge fruit, he would definitely be on guard against the other party. However, Chu Tianliang was actually impatient to make a move against him at this time. This was truly beyond his expectations. "Hee, my dear cousin, you are really naive to ask such a question. Is there really no problem with your brain?" Chu Tianliang continued to ridicule, his face full of a sense of superiority due to his superior IQ. He sneered, "If I find the spiritual knowledge fruit, of course I will fall out with you. But even without the spiritual knowledge fruit, with the relationship between us, aren't we already destined to be irreconcilable enemies? I don't understand. Chu Tianlu shook his head calmly. He asked himself honestly. Ever since he was a child, he had always treated this cousin Chu Tianliang quite well. Even if they became a little cold and estranged because of their different views in the past 2 years, it was far from becoming enemies. How could they be irreconcilable enemies? You are really slow. Fine. Seeing that you took care of me a little when I was a child, I will be merciful and let you die knowing. Let me give you a hint. Yiling Sex Duanmuyu. Chu Tianliang snorted coldly. Duanmuyu? Hearing this name, Lenny could not help but be surprised. He thought that this was a common case of infighting. For the sake of a heavenly treasure, like the spiritual knowledge fruit, countless killings would take place every day, whether it was the heavenly island or the small ancient Jianghu. He never thought that there would be Duanmuyu here. What do you mean? Chu Tianlu still seemed confused. Do you really not know? Or are you pretending not to know? Our Chu clan will soon be connected by marriage with the Yiling sect. The old monster of the Yiling sect is seriously injured, and everyone knows that he won't be able to hold on for long. Grandfather just happens to be a new old monster of the nascent soul stage, and our Chu clan's foundation is far from comparable to those traditional sections. If we can't find someone to rely on as soon as possible, not only will grandfather, a new old monster of the nascent soul stage, not be able to lead the Chu clan to a meteoric rise, he might even bring about a disaster. After all, our Chu clan has many enemies, and they definitely won't sit by and watch the Chu clan rise. The Yiling sect is in urgent need of a new old monster of the nascent soul stage. Chapter 5408. Since it's a marriage that represents the formal union of the two clans, it's a first-class event for both the Yiling sect and our Chu family. The marriage partner sent by both sides must undoubtedly be the successor of their respective forces. Only in this way can the Yiling sect and the Chu family be fully integrated into a force after the children of the two parties are born, and they can gain a foothold in the Middle Island and even the entire Archaic Alliance. Chu Tianliang continued. Hearing this, Chu Tianlu, as the person involved, did not seem to have reacted, but Linny, a bystander, could already guess what was going on. Obviously, the reason why Chu Tianliang schemed against Chu Tianlu was not for the spirit knowledge fruit, but for the marriage. I don't think I need to say more about who Duanmuyu is. Looking at the younger generation of the Archaic Alliance, she's definitely one of the top geniuses. There's no doubt about her status in the Yiling sect. Whoever marries her will be the successor of our Chu family, and they'll also get a great opportunity to enter the Yiling sect in the future. There's no doubt about this. Chu Tianliang's eyes shone as he spoke. Although their Chu family had a nascent soul-old monster, and compared to ordinary sects and families, they were already in existence that stood out. Compared to the 10 small sects and families, they were still not worth mentioning. Even if they had a nascent soul-old monster, it was useless. The reason for this was that their foundation and potential in other aspects were too lacking. Not to mention other things, just the most important core strength alone. The Chu family could not be compared to the 10 small sects and families like the Yiling sect. The number of gold core experts in any of the 10 small sects and families was more than double digits, and some even had 20 or 30. Looking at the Chu family, there were only 2 gold core experts below the nascent soul-old monster level. The gap between them was obvious. In contrast, due to the fact that they had spent a lot of money to cultivate their reserve forces in recent years, the gap between the younger generation of the Chu family and the traditional aristocratic families like the Yiling sect seemed to be much smaller, at least in terms of the number of disciples at the Great Perfection of Foundation Establishment and the Peak Late Foundation Establishment. There seemed to be little difference at first glance. However, this was completely an illusion. Although they were both at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, their strength and potential might be as different as heaven and earth. Geniuses like Ling Tianyu and Duanmuyu were destined to have boundless futures, but for the vast majority of experts at their level, It was already a blessing to be able to reach the threshold of the gold core realm, or even to be stuck there for the rest of their lives. Among the younger generation of the Chu clan, the two people who were in the limelight the most were precisely Chu Tianlu and Chu Tianliang. The former was a bit better in terms of talent and strength, but even so, he was far from being able to compare to the likes of Duan Muyu. Duan Muyu was an influential figure that received much discussion in the ancient Jianghu, while they were a group of people that were never paid attention to. Now, an opportunity had suddenly appeared in front of them, giving them the opportunity to form a marriage alliance with Duan Muyu. This was completely unimaginable in the past, so it was no wonder that Chu Tianliang was so excited. After all, he had once seen Duan Muyu with his own eyes. In addition to her somewhat heroic spirit, she could be considered to have a beautiful face and a good figure. In addition, she had the strength and status behind her. At that time, he had such a feeling that if he could conquer such a woman in bed one day, what more could he ask for in life? The discussion of the clan's upper hand was almost over, and the matter of the marriage alliance was already a foregone conclusion. Duan Muyu was close at hand, and Chu Tianliang's heart was really itching. Unfortunately, this matter was far from being in the bag. If nothing unexpected happened, the candidate sent by the Chu clan for the marriage alliance would definitely be either him or Chu Tianlu. Compared to the two of them, the other younger generation of the Chu clan were either lacking in strength or bloodline background, and would not be considered at all. Chu Tianliang had long coveted Duan Muyu, so he would naturally think of ways to get rid of Chu Tianlu before the candidate for the marriage alliance was finally decided. Not only was Duan Muyu the grandson of the clan leader, but Duan Muyu's strength was also a notch higher than his. This was the biggest obstacle in front of him. That was why he had schemed so hard to fall out with Chu Tianlu. Tai Snake Island was the best opportunity to get rid of Chu Tianlu. For this, he had spent a great deal of effort to persuade his father, and did not hesitate to find someone to rent 2 additional entry slots. It was all for the sake of bringing in these 2 helpers by his side. Otherwise, let alone killing Chu Tianlu, it would already be good if he was not killed instead. I have no plans to fight with you over Duan Muyu. Only now did Chu Tianlu suddenly understand the other party's intentions. He had always been focused on cultivation, and very rarely paid attention to gossip unrelated to cultivation. Even this time, he was one of the last to find out about the marriage alliance with the Leaf Spirit sect. He had no interest in Duan Muyu at all. He never expected that he would actually become a thorn in Chu Tianliang's side because of this. He was completely innocent. Is that so? Chu Tianliang narrowed his eyes when he heard this. He clearly did not believe him. As the saying went, a fair and graceful lady was a gentleman's desire. Although Duan Muyu was very different from ordinary women, she did not lack for men at all. On the contrary, she was even more attractive. He did not believe that she had no feelings at all. Everything I said is the truth. I've never seen Duan Muyu, and I've never cared about Duan Muyu. You don't have to worry about this. In any case, the two of us have been brothers for several decades. Is it appropriate for us to kill each other for a woman we don't even know? Chu Tianlu countered with a question. Now that you put it like that, it really doesn't seem too appropriate. Chu Tianliang's attitude suddenly changed. He changed the subject and said, "To be honest, this cousin of yours has never mistreated me. If it wasn't absolutely necessary, I don't want to fight to the death. But what if grandfather decides to let you marry Duan Muyu? What should I do?" Although he had already made up his mind to get rid of Chu Tianlu on Tai Snake Island, and the situation was already in the bag, this was not without risks for Chu Tianliang. After all, Chu Tianlu was not an ordinary person. If he suddenly died on Tai Snake Island at this critical juncture, no matter how flawless his preparations were, it was still very easy to arouse suspicion. If his grandfather took this matter seriously, there would be a lot of trouble in the future. "That's easy. I'll just refuse on the spot," Chu Tianlu said directly. Chu Tianlu said straightforwardly. He had no interest in this matter in the first place. Besides, he was not a one-track-minded idiot. Once the negotiations broke down in this situation, his chances of survival would be close to zero. After all, apart from Chu Tianliang, the other party also had an expert in the early stage of the Gold Core realm, and an expert at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation realm. He was not Ling Tianyu. Chapter 5409. In Chu Tianliang's view, if it really reached that step, Chu Tianlu would not be able to resist even if he really wanted to. Moreover, such a good thing had fallen into his lap. He did not believe that Chu Tianlu would be stupid enough to refuse. Then what do you want? Chu Tianlu frowned. Chu Tianliang thought for a moment, then suddenly grinned. How about this? You go back and immediately marry a woman. I'll arrange a brothel girl for you. Do you agree? Hearing this, Linny could not help but curl his lips. This boy was a bit like Xue Jianfeng, full of evil tricks. He was worried that killing Chu Tianlu here would leave a loophole, so he simply let Chu Tianlu ruin himself. Once he married a brothel girl, Chu Tianlu would naturally be excluded from the list of marriage candidates. Moreover, there would be no hidden dangers, killing two birds with one stone. I don't agree. Chu Tianlu refused straightforwardly. Even a bystander like Lin, he could not help but be a little speechless. In this situation, anyone would think of a way to deal with it. They could completely agree verbally first, and then make plans after returning. That way, at least there would be room for negotiation. But this guy actually refused without hesitation. Was this guy a one-track mind, or was there something wrong with his brain? What did you say? Chu Tianliang thought he had misheard. I'll say it again. I don't agree to this kind of thing. Chu Tianlu's expression remained unchanged. Then there's nothing to say. My dear cousin, you can go die. Chu Tianliang immediately gave the two people beside him a look, indicating that they should make a move. Since things had already reached this point, no matter how great the consequences were, he could only make a move. Otherwise, all his previous efforts would have been wasted. Wait, I definitely won't agree to a brothel girl's bullshit. But what if I say I can definitely find the spirit knowledge fruit and exchange it for my life? Chu Tianlu suddenly said. What did you say? Everyone was shocked. Even Lin Yi, who was watching coldly in the distance, felt his eyelids twitch. Normally, anyone who heard such words would scoff. If it was really as Chu Tianlu said, that he could definitely find the spirit knowledge fruit, could it be that Tai Snake Island was owned by his family? However, at this moment, Chu Tianlu's expression was deadly earnest. He didn't look like he was speaking carelessly at all. The feeling he gave others was as if he was speaking an unquestionable fact. Regardless of whether others believed him or not, judging from his posture, he definitely believed it. I can find the divine awareness fruit. The divine awareness fruit belongs to you. And from then on, we'll mind our own business, said Chu Tianlu seriously. Originally, Chu Tianliang didn't believe this kind of nonsense at all. Just as he was about to order people to make a move, the initial Aura's core stage expert next to him suddenly came over. This person was called Chu Wenshang, and was the only Aura's core stage expert in the Chu family. If it wasn't for the fact that he was separated by a few generations from the ancestral family by blood relations, he might have been chosen as the next family head. Even if he wasn't good enough, he would have been able to mix his way into the position of a top-notch elder with real power. He wouldn't be like now, where he only had the empty title of a top-notch elder. Of course, if it wasn't for the fact that his position was awkward, Chu Wenshang wouldn't have appeared here today. After all, as an elder of the initial Aura's core stage, it was a bit shameful for him to come out and fight for a junior like Chu Tianliang. However, for the sake of profit, Chu Wenshang finally pinched his nose and agreed. 1,000 spirit jades. This was the price that Chu Tianliang offered. If it wasn't for his father, who was in charge of the entire Chu family's finances, he wouldn't have been able to take out such a hard-earned capital. Chu Wenshang didn't even think about it, and agreed on the spot. Don't forget that this was Tai Snake Island, the legendary place where the divine awareness fruit was produced. If he ran out and killed someone, not only would he get 1,000 spirit jades, he might even have the chance to obtain the divine awareness fruit. Why not? Tianliang, why don't you give him a chance? Chu Wenshang said. Seeing Chu Tianliang begin to frown, he added, he inexplicably jumped down here today. I think there must be a problem here. Maybe there will be an unexpected harvest? Chu Tianliang hesitated. Although Chu Wenshang's position in the family was somewhat awkward, his strength was still there. In particular, his father, in order to obtain the position of the next patriarch, needed to vigorously rope in this important expert. At present, in order to deal with Chu Tianlu, he needed to rely on the other party. Chu Wenshang's words really couldn't be ignored. But the problem was, if Chu Tianlu really found the divine awareness fruit, what should he do? Could it be that he really let the other party go? Compared to the divine awareness fruit, in Chu Tianliang's eyes, the marriage with Duan Muyu was obviously much more important. If he couldn't get rid of Chu Tianlu this time, it would be equivalent to alerting the enemy. After returning to the Middle Island, he would no longer have any chance. Don't worry, it's hard to say whether he can find it or not. Moreover, even if he really finds it, won't you still have the final say? Chu Wenshang sneered silently. Chu Tianliang's eyes lit up. He pretended to hesitate for a moment, then nodded and said, Okay, if you can find the divine awareness fruit, I promise to let you go this time. But you also have to promise not to fight with me over Duan Muyu after we return. Otherwise don't blame me for being ruthless. I have no interest in Duan Muyu, it's a deal. Chu Tianlu did not doubt him, and immediately turned to lead the way. Chu Tianliang and Chu Wenshang glanced at each other, then brought another Peak Late Foundation establishment expert, and followed closely behind. They thought that the mantis stalked the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. An hour later, Chu Tianlu had already brought everyone to the deepest part of the cave. Everything was calm and peaceful along the way. Regardless of who it was, such a mysterious and unfathomable underground cave would definitely be a place where danger lurked on all sides. They never expected that. Forget about terrifying vicious beasts. There wasn't even a fly to be seen. It was like a paradise, a complete mess. Where's the divine awareness fruit? You've led us in circles for so long. Chu Tianlu, you can't be purely trying to stall for time, right? Chu Tianliang was starting to get impatient. Not only him, even Chu Wenshang beside him started to show impatience. The reason why he believed Chu Tianlu was completely because of this guy's miraculous discovery of this underground cave. Unfortunately, from the looks of it, this guy's miraculousness seemed to end here. I'm not going in circles. Chu Tianlu suddenly stopped and turned around to look at Chu Tianliang and the other two. The divine awareness fruit has been found. Where? Everyone was shocked at the same time, and couldn't help but look all around. In the end, there was nothing. You dare trick us? Chu Tianliang was about to become hostile on the spot. If Chu Wenshang hadn't spoken, he would have already attacked just now. Now that he had confirmed that the other party was deliberately mystifying and stalling for time, there was naturally no need to continue wasting time. Chapter 54:10. It's here. Everyone was even more confused. Apart from some seaweed that could be seen everywhere, there was clearly nothing else. So where did the divine knowledge fruit come from? It seems that they really don't know. Chu Tianlu's expression became more and more strange. Because the Chu family had always had a quota for Tai Snake Island by chance, they had collected quite a lot of ancient books related to the divine knowledge fruit. As long as they made proper preparations, they could obtain a lot of information about the divine knowledge fruit. At the very least, it would be much more abundant than the hearsay in the outside world. However, from the looks of it, Chu Tianliang and the others clearly hadn't put in any effort in this aspect. After speaking, Chu Tianlu bent down and squatted down, finding a rather oddly shaped black stone at his feet. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, but if one observed it carefully, they would discover that the shape of this black stone was extremely similar to a triangular poisonous snake head. In particular, there were various sinister spots on its surface, which made people tremble with fear. Chu Tianliang and the others still had stupefied expressions. Chu Tianlu picked up the black stone as he explained, Everyone knows that the divine knowledge fruit is shaped like a snake gallbladder, and is even said to be transformed from the gallbladder of the Thai snake clan. However, it can't just be a snake gallbladder growing outside, right? According to the records of the ancient strange records, the survival rate of the Thai snake clan is extremely low. More than 90% of the young snakes will die prematurely, and among these young snakes that die prematurely, an extremely small number will be buried in the ground and petrified. Among the petrified young snakes, an extremely small number will condense the essence of the Thai snake clan, which is the legendary divine knowledge fruit. As he spoke, Chu Tianlu carefully removed the black stone from the ground. Chu Tianliang and the others' eyelids all jumped. This black stone really did look like a snake head, and there was actually a long pitch-black snake body attached to it. However, it was a petrified snake body. At first glance, it really did look like a living snake. Chu Tianliang and the others were already mostly convinced by this strange shape. One by one, their breathing immediately became hurried. After all, this was the legendary divine knowledge fruit. Even Chu Tianliang, who had his eyes set on marriage alliances, couldn't help but feel his heart beat wildly at the thought of being able to immediately obtain the divine knowledge fruit. On this trip to Tai Snake Island, getting rid of Chu Tianlu was his primary goal. But if he could obtain the divine knowledge fruit, that would be an enormous surprise. It would be a waste to not have it. Give it to me quickly. Chu Tianliang began to be impatient. He wished he could snatch the petrifying Thai snake into his hands. Wait, we agreed before that I'll give you the divine knowledge fruit, and from then on, we'll mind our own business. Chu Tianlu wasn't so naive that he couldn't be saved. Of course, I swear on my family's name that I won't go back on my word. As long as you don't ruin my plans after we return, it's fine. Chu Tianliang's face was filled with sincerity. Okay, but I can't give it to you here. I'll give it to you as soon as I get back to Middle Island. Chu Tianlu didn't believe the other party's oath that easily. Just for the sake of competing for a marriage alliance candidate, he didn't hesitate to kill his brother of several decades. If he believed in the other party's character, then it could only prove one thing. His brain really was flooded with water. Chu Tianlu didn't believe in Chu Tianliang, and it was very obvious that Chu Tianliang didn't believe in this cousin of his at all. It should be known that the conspiracy on Tai Snake Island this time absolutely couldn't be exposed, especially to the patriarch grandfather, who had recently advanced to the nascent soul stage. Otherwise, not only would all the previous plans fail, but it would also bring trouble to himself. Most importantly, once Chu Tianlu returned to Middle Island, he would be like a fish in water, and they would never have the chance to make a move again. At that time, even if Chu Tianlu went back on his word and didn't give them the divine knowledge fruit, what could they do? Chu Tianlu, my patience is limited. Don't push your luck. Chu Tianliang's face immediately darkened. This time, no matter what, he wouldn't let the other party return to Middle Island, even if he didn't want the divine knowledge fruit. Did I push my luck? Didn't we agree on this? Or did you never intend to let me return to Middle Island alive? Chu Tianlu looked at the three people in front of him, and didn't show much nervousness. Logically, in this situation, he was the fish on the chopping block. His life or death was all in the hands of the other party. After all, there was an early-stage gold core stage expert on the other side. Once they made a move, he wouldn't be able to escape at all. I really let you. Chu Tianliang grinned coldly. Just as he was about to turn hostile, Chu Wenshang, who was next to him, suddenly interrupted. Tianlu, it shouldn't be a problem for me to be the guarantor for the matter between you two brothers, right? Chu Tianlu frowned, paused for a moment and said, Okay, I trust Uncle Wenshang's character, but it's absolutely impossible for me to hand over the divine knowledge fruit here. Since it's like this, then let's each take a step back. After we get out of here, you give us the divine knowledge fruit, and we give you the only flying spiritual beast. That shouldn't be a problem, right? Chu Wenshang thought of a compromise. After hearing this, Chu Tianliang immediately frowned, but after noticing the other party's eyes, he held back and didn't speak. Okay, Chu Tianlu readily agreed. He also knew that it was unrealistic to return to Central Island unscathed in this situation. If he could really use the divine knowledge fruit to exchange for a flying spiritual beast, although there would still be some risks, it was better than wasting time here. A long night was fraught with trouble, and if Chu Tianliang's patience was exhausted, there would be no point in talking. Okay, then it's settled. Chu Wenshang nodded, and then said, but before that, shouldn't you let us verify the divine knowledge fruit with our own eyes? This snake stone does look a bit mysterious, but seeing is believing. Who knows if there really is a spiritual knowledge fruit inside? This, Chu Tianlu hesitated for a moment. The thing in his hand was his only bargaining chip. But as Chu Wenshang said, if he couldn't prove that there was a divine knowledge fruit inside, there was not much room for him to bargain with the other party. So he immediately nodded and said, okay. As he said this, Chu Tianlu suddenly exerted force in his hand, and the petrified snake body rapidly disintegrated section by section. After a while, there was a pile of black gravel at his feet, but everyone's eyes were fixed on his right hand. In Chu Tianlu's right hand, there was a small dark red object lying quietly, like a living thing. It looked very much like a snake gallbladder, but the strangest thing was that this suspected snake gallbladder was exuding a strong, almost suffocating snake smell, and it was even pulsing weakly. Divine knowledge fruit, everyone gulped. At this time, even if their eyesight was poor, they could see that this must be the legendary divine knowledge fruit. Chapter 54:11. Jumping into the sea, and finding this underground cave with the help of God, and then finding the spirit knowledge fruit with the help of God. If this was not God, what was? There should be no problem now, right? Chu Tianlu said to Chu Tianliang, and the other three. Chu Tianliang snorted coldly and did not answer. But Chu Wenshang's attitude towards the spirit knowledge fruit was obviously much more enthusiastic. A smile suddenly appeared on his face. Well, no problem, but Heavenly Road, since it's rare to come here, why not continue to look around? Maybe there are other spirit knowledge fruits? No, this is the only one. Chu Tianlu shook his head decisively. What do you mean? Chu Wenshang's expression froze. People were always greedy. Spirit knowledge fruits were good things that could only be encountered by chance, so the more the better. Although he did not know why Chu Tianlu was so amazing, it would not be a bad thing if he could get a few more spirit knowledge fruits. He did not expect Chu Tianlu to flatly refuse. It's not that I don't want to find them, but rather that the divine knowledge fruits are mutually exclusive. Any divine knowledge fruit can only take shape after gathering a large amount of young Tai Shi's soul essence. Thus, there has never been a precedent of twins or multiple births. Normally, they can't be found. Even if they can be found, there will only be one, and no more. Everything I've said is based on ancient texts. I didn't make it up. Okay, I understand. Chu Wenshang nodded and suggested, since there are no other spirit knowledge fruits, there is no point in staying here. To avoid trouble, why don't we go out now? Chu Tianliang was still in a dilemma. If there were a few more spirit knowledge fruits, it would be fine. But one spirit knowledge fruit was not even enough for him to share with Chu Wenshang. If he let Chu Tianlu go like this, it would be too easy for him. He was really unwilling. Okay, but don't try anything funny. Otherwise I will crush the spirit knowledge fruit and die with you. Of course, Chu Tianlu couldn't ask for more. From the very beginning, he didn't have the idea of taking the spirit knowledge fruit for himself. This was a bargaining chip he used to protect himself. If he couldn't find it today, he would really die here. No problem. In order to show his sincerity, Chu Wenshang indicated for Chu Tianliang to take the lead and walk in front of him. He and the other Peak Late Foundation establishment expert also walked in front of Chu Tianlu. This way, no matter what little movement they made, it would fall into Chu Tianlu's eyes, and they wouldn't have to worry about any small movements behind their backs. Chu Tianlu sighed in relief, but he didn't relax his guard because of this. Before safely returning to the middle island, he definitely didn't dare to lower his guard in the slightest. Earlier, he said he believed in Chu Wenxiang's character, but that was just lip service. Since Chu Wenxiang was helping Chu Tianliang to deal with him, it meant that there had definitely been a deal behind the scenes. Trusting him would be courting death. However, before he even took 2 steps, Chu Tianlu's eyelids suddenly jumped. Chu Wenxiang's silhouette suddenly became indistinct, due to the fluorescence of seaweed everywhere. Although the light in this underground cave was not comparable to the light outside, it was not weak either. The shadows inside were very obvious, but because of the irregular distribution of seaweed, the shadows were not quite the same as outside. Chu Tianlu's perception wasn't weak. Even if the shadows suddenly became indistinct, under this type of environment, it would be very difficult for anyone else to notice it. After all, with every step they took, their shadows would change irregularly, but he was able to distinguish them quite quickly. However, even though this was the case, it was still too late. The instant the shadow became indistinct, another silhouette silently stuck to Chu Tianlu's back. Then it quickly became tangible. It was actually Chu Wenxiang. Shadow sticking steps. The instant Chu Tianlu sensed all of this, his heart went cold. Although the cultivation methods were more or less the same, every single sect and family in the archaic world had their own symbolic characteristics. Even the Middle Island's Chu family, which couldn't even compare to the 10 small sects and families, still had their own unique symbolic ability, shadow. Just like how the essence of the leaf spirit sect came from leaves, almost all of the Chu family's cultivation methods and moves revolved around shadows. Among them, their movement techniques were especially praised. Wherever the shadow went, the person would follow. This was the Chu family's shadow sticking steps. As the Chu family's most outstanding young disciple, Chu Tianlu actually also knew the shadow sticking steps. After all, he was already an expert at the Great Circle of Foundation establishment. However, even if they both used the shadow sticking steps, when he used it, it was completely different from when Chu Wenxiang used it. Chu Tianlu's shadow sticking steps could only be used in a well-behaved manner. Wherever the shadow went, the person would follow. At most, he could be considered to have learned it. However, Chu Wenxiang was an expert at the initial golden core stage. His strength and realm were completely different. He had almost mastered the shadow sticking steps. To a certain extent, he could even actively change the trajectory of his shadow, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. Once the shadow sticking steps was used, Chu Wenxiang immediately arrived behind Chu Tianlu. The distance between them was less than a step, and he was practically stepping on Chu Tianlu's heel. If an expert at the initial golden core stage got so close, the consequences would be unthinkable. Without a doubt, everything Chu Wenxiang said before was to numb Chu Tianlu. From start to finish, his goal was the divine knowledge fruit. At the same time, he didn't play around with his agreement with Chu Tianliang. To put it simply, he wanted the divine knowledge fruit, as well as the 1,000 spirit jades. Tianlu, my apologies. The corners of Chu Wenxiang's mouth curled up into a cold smile. In his hand, a short blade was already pressed against Chu Tianlu's neck. Because they all relied on shadows to survive, their various martial skills were inclined towards appearing and disappearing unpredictably. The Chu clan's experts basically all walked the path of assassins, and he was no exception. The blade streaked across, but to Chu Wenxiang's great surprise, there was no obstruction from the blade. His blade, which he was determined to win, actually streaked across the air. How is this possible? Chu Wenxiang's heart jumped. He believed that there shouldn't have been any flaws in his previous act. To a certain extent, he should have already numbed Chu Tianlu. Yet this brat's reaction was actually this fast? Chu Tianlu's reaction was indeed fast. Not only did he dodge Chu Wenxiang's blade in a moment of imminent peril, he even immediately counterattacked. The target of his counterattack wasn't Chu Tianlu, but Chu Tianliang, who was walking in front of him. Shadow sticking steps. It was the same shadow sticking steps. Chu Tianlu admittedly couldn't appear and disappear unpredictably like Chu Wenxiang, but Chu Tianliang's position in front of him was really too perfect. In particular, this guy's reaction was extremely slow. Even now, he unexpectedly still didn't know that Chu Wenxiang had already made a move against him. If not him, then who should he look for? What are you doing? Chu Tianliang was immediately shocked when Chu Tianlu's short blade suddenly pressed against his neck. He didn't dare to move at all. Chapter 54:12. Let's talk about it, don't be impulsive. Chu Wensheng hurriedly agreed, although it seemed to be just a deal between him and Chu Tianliang. If Chu Tianliang died here, he would not be able to live in peace after returning to the Middle Island. Chu Tianliang's father would definitely find trouble with him. He was a ruthless character who held great financial power. Even an expert in the early gold core stage like him could not afford to offend him. Chu Tianlu, if you dare to touch even half of my hair today, I guarantee that you will die without a complete corpse. Chu Tianliang was still putting on a brave front. Hee, if I didn't react quickly just now, I would have died without a complete corpse. Chu Tianlu snorted disdainfully and said coldly, I originally wanted to give the divine knowledge fruit to you, but now I've changed my mind. Even if I die here today, I will drag you down with me. As he spoke, the dagger in his hand had already pierced half an inch into Chu Tianliang's neck. Immediately blood gushed out. Chu Tianliang was so scared that he collapsed. He did not dare to move at all, and did not even dare to speak nonsense. Wait, don't be impulsive. I'll let you go. Chu Wensheng hurriedly advised, but his eyes were paying attention to the surrounding light. He knew very well that in this situation, the problem could not be solved by negotiation. The only solution was to find a good angle and use the shadow step again. Only in this way could he regain the initiative. Okay, but Uncle Wensheng, you don't have to waste your time looking for an angle. Being hit by your shadow step once is enough to make people tremble in fear. If you do it again, maybe my hand will shake and I will really kill him. At that time, should I count his life on your head or mine? Chu Tianlu said vigilantly, Don't worry, I won't do such a stupid thing. Or else I won't be able to explain it to the patriarch. Don't you think so? Since the other party had seen through him, Chu Wensheng could only give up this plan and think of another way. Chu Wensheng spread his hands and retreated. Only when he retreated 20 steps away did Chu Tianlu let out a sigh of relief. This distance had already far exceeded the range of the shadow step. As long as he ensured that he didn't give his opponent an opportunity to take advantage of, even if Chu Wensheng was an expert of the initial gold core stage, he wouldn't be able to catch him unprepared. As long as he left behind a sliver of opportunity to react, Chu Tianliang would become a dead soul under his blade. Now that things had developed to this point, Chu Tianlu no longer cared about any brotherly affection, nor did he think about what the consequences would be if he killed Chu Tianliang here. Right now, surviving was the most important thing. Chu Wensheng, on the other hand, was extremely cooperative. After all, if something really happened to Chu Tianliang, even if he could get rid of Chu Tianlu, it would be meaningless. At that time, regardless of whether it was the Chu family's master or Chu Tianliang's father, they would both vent their anger on him, and from then on, he would no longer have a foothold in the Chu family. However, even if he used his toes to think, Chu Wensheng's cooperation was limited to the surface. In his heart, he must still have various plans. He just couldn't find a suitable opportunity. As long as Chu Tianlu showed the slightest bit of relaxation or flaw, this guy would definitely attack immediately. Chu Tianlu himself was well aware of this. In fact, for him, the biggest problem at the moment was how to get out of here. Normally, it would not be difficult to climb back to the cliff from here. At least, for experts above the foundation establishment stage, it would be a piece of cake. However, the problem was that he was threatening Chu Tianliang at the moment, and there was an expert in the early gold core stage like Chu Wensheng eyeing him covetously. The whole process had to be done without the slightest flaw, which was really difficult. Lin Yi was still watching coldly from afar. He had no intention of intervening. Since he saw the legendary divine knowledge fruit here, he would definitely not let it go. Although he did not do things like killing people and stealing their treasures, he had never been a gentleman. After muddling around in the cultivation world for so many years, Lin Yi's mentality had long been adapted to the local customs. Even if he did not have the habit of killing people, stealing treasures was not a problem. However, now was the time to watch the show, so there was no need to rush to make a move. As a bystander, Lin Yi was already able to roughly deduce the interests of these people through the conversation from before. Even though Chu Tianlu was in imminent danger at this moment, as far as he was concerned, the method to deal with this situation was extremely simple. The key to breaking the situation was not strength. In fact, with the strength of the peak of foundation establishment, unless it was a super genius like Ling Tianyu, who could challenge those of a higher realm, Chu Tianlu had no chance of winning. The key was the awareness. No matter how Chu Tianlu was, Lin Yi thought that if he was in his position, and his strength was only at the peak of foundation establishment, he would definitely not hesitate to slit Chu Tianliang's throat in front of Chu Wenshang. This was not a simple impulse, but a deliberate decision, and it could be said to be the only feasible way to break the situation. There were two reasons. One was to eliminate future troubles. For Chu Tianlu, killing Chu Tianliang, his younger cousin, would no doubt have no small repercussions, but it was still much better than leaving him alive. Being stared at by such a poisonous snake would bring him endless troubles, so it was better to cut the Gordian knot quickly. Second, if he directly killed Chu Tianliang at this time, not only would Chu Wenshang not fly into a rage out of humiliation and start a massacre, it was extremely likely that he would choose to bide his time, and might even turn around and help Chu Tianlu on the spot. The reason was very simple. As long as Chu Wenshang wasn't an idiot, he should be able to distinguish the pros and cons. As long as Chu Tianliang died, no matter what kind of deal he reached with Chu Tianliang and his father, they were bound to fall apart. At this time, even if he killed Chu Tianlu, there was nothing he could do to remedy the situation. On the contrary, the two most outstanding young disciples of the Chu family had both died on Tai Snake Island, both under his eyes. Even if Chu Wenshang jumped into the Yellow River, he definitely wouldn't be able to wash his name clean. Even if he didn't die, he would lose a layer of skin. That was why, if Chu Tianliang truly died under Chu Tianlu's hands, the best choice for Chu Wenshang wasn't to take action against Chu Tianlu. Rather than doing a strenuous and unrewarding task, it would be better to simply stand at Chu Tianlu's side and provide him with timely assistance. Like this matter would become a private fight between two cousins. When he Chu Wenshang returned, he would at most receive a complaint of lax supervision, but wouldn't receive any substantial punishment. If his resolution and boldness were a bit greater, he could even stand out and testify against Chu Tianliang and his father's plot. As long as he could endure until Chu Tianlu took over, there was no need to doubt the rewards at that time. Strictly speaking, this kind of simple and clear way to break the situation wasn't hard to think of. Unfortunately, the onlookers saw the game more clearly than the players. Even an outsider like Lin Yi could see things clearly, but Chu Tianlu, who was in the game, couldn't turn things around so quickly. Right now, he was even fretting over how to force Chu Tianliang to leave. Chapter 54:13. Chu Tianlu really couldn't be sure. No matter which option he chose, it would be extremely dangerous. It was very difficult for him to not give Chu Wenshang an opportunity to take advantage of. But if he continued to stay in this cave, what would he do when the tide rose? In reality, this wasn't the most dangerous thing. From the moment Chu Tianlu jumped into the sea, he already knew that today was a disaster. Tianlu, continuing this deadlock isn't a solution. Why don't you hurry up and leave? Chu Wenshang urged. Chu Tianlu hesitated for a moment and finally nodded. I'll go out first. You guys stay 60 feet away from me. If you take a step closer, I'll kill him. Okay. Chu Wenshang agreed. But before he finished speaking, the expert at the peak of the late Foundation establishment realm on the other side suddenly launched an attack. His figure turned into a black shadow and pounced towards Chu Tianlu. He was immediately shocked. Xingping, you're crazy. This person was called Chu Xingping. His strength could be considered outstanding among the younger generation of the Chu family. However, he was different from Chu Tianlu and Chu Tianliang. He wasn't a descendant of the ancestral family, so no matter how strong his strength was, it was useless. He was destined to only serve as a foil to the two. In the past, he was rarely noticed by others, and had always appeared in front of everyone as Chu Tianliang's attendant. Not only Chu Wenshang, but Chu Tianlu was also shocked. From such a distance, even an expert of the early gold core stage, like Chu Wenshang, couldn't succeed in a sneak attack, let alone a peak late foundation establishment realm expert. What was this guy thinking? Wasn't he too impulsive? Chu Xingping, you want to fucking kill me? Chu Tianliang roared in anger. Although he wished he could hack Chu Tianlu, who was behind him, into 1,000 pieces, that had to be after he escaped danger. Chu Xingping doing this, wasn't that forcing Chu Tianlu to kill him? I'm saving you. Chu Xingping also roared. His expression seemed sincere, but only he himself knew exactly what he was thinking in his heart. As he spoke, a long and narrow shadow that was faintly discernible shot out from an extremely hidden angle, noiselessly and rapidly sweeping towards Chu Tianlu's feet. The tip of the shadow shone with cold light. It was shockingly a materialized sharp blade. It was one of the Chu family's signature martial techniques, Shadow Blade. Chu Tianlu's eyelids twitched violently. Only Chu Xingping wasn't scary, but since Chu Xingping had moved, then Chu Wenshang couldn't possibly watch coldly from the sidelines. He would definitely wait for an opportunity to move. Facing the joint attack of a peak late foundation establishment expert and an initial Aurus core expert at the same time, even if he held Chu Tianliang as a hostage, he still didn't have the slightest possibility of escaping unscathed. Dang! A crisp sound of metal colliding rang out. The short blade in Chu Tianlu's hand accurately blocked the other party's shadow blade. The tremendous force of impact was enough to collapse a thick wall. An opportunity. Seeing this, Chu Tianliang was overjoyed. He thought that Chu Tianlu would definitely deal a killing blow at the first moment. He didn't expect that Chu Tianlu would actually choose to block the shadow blade, and even use the blade that posed the greatest threat to him. It was simply extremely stupid. One had to know that the impact of the shadow blade was the strongest among all of the Chu family's shadow martial techniques. Even if Chu Tianlu's strength was a bit higher than Chu Xingping's, he still wasn't a Aurus core expert. After blocking the shadow blade, he would inevitably be forced back. This was the best opportunity to escape. Chu Tianliang's eyes shone, and he gathered all his strength. He decided that as long as Chu Tianlu took half a step back, he would immediately charge forward. Once he successfully escaped, he would definitely make him die a tragic death. However, unexpectedly, after Chu Tianlu blocked the shadow blade, he didn't move in the slightest. Not only did he not take half a step back, he instead placed the short blade on Chu Tianlu's neck the moment the block ended. Chu Tianliang was so frightened that his hair stood on end, and he was indescribably shocked. How is this possible? Chu Tianliang was simply incredulous. Only when he glanced at the abnormally pitch-black shadow at his side out of the corner of his eye did he finally come to a realization. This guy actually specialized in cultivating unmoving shadow. Unmoving shadow. In the eyes of over 90% of the Chu family's disciples, this was an out-and-out useless move. It wasn't a bodily martial technique, and it didn't have any killing effect. Its only use was as the name implied. As long as the shadow didn't move, the person wouldn't move. For the absolute majority of people, this kind of move might not be used in their entire lives, so they naturally wouldn't spend the effort to specifically cultivate it. Rather than wasting time on this, it would be better to properly polish moves like the shadow blade and shadow step. Those were the ultimate moves that would produce immediate results. Looking at the entire Middle Island Chu family, the number of people who specialized in cultivating unmoving shadow probably didn't exceed 3. He never expected that Chu Tianlu would actually be one of them. Chu Tianliang immediately had a belly full of profanities, but unfortunately, he could only forcefully hold them back. Chu Tianliang was the meat on the chopping block, and the situation was already very tense. If he took the initiative to provoke Chu Tianlu at this time, he might really lose his little life. Relying on unmoving shadow, Chu Tianlu successfully blocked the shadow blade. As long as he controlled Chu Tianliang, he would be in an invincible position. However, without waiting for him to feel happy, Chu Wenshang's attack had already arrived. At the same time as a vague shadow rapidly approached Chu Tianlu, it unceasingly split into countless strands. Like countless strange tentacles, they enveloped him layer by layer from all directions. It was just like a 1,000-layered cage that had risen from the ground. Chu Tianlu's heart tightened. This was a profound martial technique that only experts at or above the golden core stage could cultivate shadow bind. He could block the shadow blade, but how could he block the shadow bind? Killing intent flashed in his eyes, and Chu Tianlu's dagger was about to pierce Chu Tianliang's throat. He knew that he couldn't escape the shadow bind. At this time he could only break the jar. Unfortunately, in the end, it was still too late. Chu Wenshang was, after all, an early golden core stage expert. His control over shadow martial techniques was much higher than Chu Tianlu's. Even though Chu Xingping's sneak attack just now was very sudden, Chu Tianlu's response could be said to be perfect, and Chu Tianlu's follow-up attack was also somewhat hurried. However, in the end, Chu Tianlu still seized the opportunity. At the last instant before the dagger entered Chu Tianliang's throat, the dagger was forcibly covered by the shadow tentacles. No matter how much strength Chu Tianlu exerted, he couldn't pierce the dagger any deeper. Chu Tianliang escaped from death. At this time, Chu Xingping, who had just used the shadow blade, had already rushed over. Looking at his posture, he was prepared to take advantage of the moment when Chu Tianlu was controlled by the shadow bind to send him on his way. As long as he got rid of Chu Tianlu, he could get a share of 100 spirit jades. Although this price was only 1/10 of Chu Wenshang's, for a collateral descendant like Chu Xingping, it was already a huge sum of money. For this, he naturally disregarded his own safety. At this time, Chu Tianlu was already heavily bound by the shadow bind, unable to move. This was a ready-made head. If he didn't kill him now, then when? Chapter 54:14. Even Chu Wenshang was shocked when he saw this scene. Chu Tianlu was trapped to the point where he didn't have a chance to make a move. The owner of this dagger was actually Chu Tianliang. Chu Xingping bravely came to save Chu Tianliang without any regard for his own safety. Yet Chu Tianliang actually seized the opportunity to stab his heart. This sudden turn of events happened too suddenly, and even Chu Wenshang and Chu Tianlu were momentarily stupefied. "You're crazy." Chu Wenshang continued to trap Chu Tianlu while frowning at Chu Tianliang. He really couldn't understand the scene in front of him. Was this guy a lunatic who couldn't distinguish between friend and foe? This bastard just wanted to kill me on purpose. Did he think I couldn't see it? Chu Tianliang looked at Chu Xingping, who died on the ground, and laughed coldly. Aren't you thinking too much? Chu Wenshang didn't comment on this. Indeed, Chu Xingping acting rashly just now was debatable, but to say that he wanted to kill Chu Tianliang on purpose wasn't logical. What benefits did killing Chu Tianliang bring him? One had to know that the descendants of the ancestral family weren't just Chu Tianlu and Chu Tianliang. Unless all the descendants of the ancestral family died, Chu Xingping, a branch family descendant, would only be able to ascend to the position. Killing Chu Tianliang wouldn't bring him any substantial benefits. Instead, he would be hated and even chased by Chu Tianliang's father. Did he have nothing better to do? Moreover, even if Chu Xingping didn't choose a good opportunity to act just now, with his strength, this was the most he could do. The result proved that his gamble wasn't wrong. If it weren't for his shadow blade attracting Chu Tianlu's attention, Chu Wenshang wouldn't have had the chance to follow up. Not only did Chu Tianliang not feel the slightest bit of gratitude, he even killed him without hesitation. In an instant, Chu Wenshang felt a chill from the bottom of his heart. Although it was said that a man must be ruthless, and mutual deception was the norm in the world of cultivation, it was really rare to see someone as ruthless as Chu Tianliang. Just because of an unreliable suspicion, he directly killed his own helper. especially under the premise that his life had just been saved by the other party. Even if Chu Wenxiang had seen all kinds of schemes, he still couldn't help but feel a chill. A dignified early-stage gold core expert was actually frightened by a mere peak late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. It sounded a little ridiculous, but it was the truth. Chu Wenxiang shuddered with fear at the moment. What are you waiting for? Chu Tianliang furrowed his brows. He didn't care at all about how great of an impact his blade had on others. His eyes only stared at Chu Tianlu. He had originally schemed to get rid of Chu Tianlu on this trip, and after experiencing what happened just now, he was even more happy to get rid of him. Right now, Chu Tianlu was already surrounded by layers of shadow bind. As time passed, not only would the shadow bind's power not weaken, it would instead continuously strengthen. In the beginning it only bound his hand, but by now, his entire body was completely unable to move. Unless Chu Wenxiang took the initiative to let him go, the only thing he could do was close his eyes and wait for death. You do it yourself, the spiritual knowledge fruit is mine. Chu Wenxiang's tone was unquestionable. He wanted the 1,000 spirit jades that Chu Tianliang and his son had promised him, and he also wanted the spiritual knowledge fruit that he could easily obtain. Uncle Wenxiang, aren't you being a bit too greedy? Chu Tianliang's brows furrowed even deeper. His first priority at the moment was undoubtedly to get rid of Chu Tianlu, but he didn't want to give up on the spiritual knowledge fruit. Although the opponent's strength was at the early gold core stage, and he definitely couldn't compete with him, it could be seen that everyone should have a share, right? What do you want? Chu Wenxiang's eyes suddenly became a bit more vigilant. Chu Tianliang's performance of stabbing Chu Xingping to death with a blade just now had left a deep impression on him. In the face of benefits, this junior who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth might take a risk out of desperation. Everyone who sees it has a share. Everyone divide it equally. Chu Tianliang immediately proposed. Divide it equally? It's just one spiritual knowledge fruit. What's the use of splitting it in two? Chu Wenxiang flatly refused. The function of a spiritual knowledge fruit was to raise one's spirit by one level. This was a matter of fact. Once it was split in two, it meant that its effect would not be enough to raise the spirit's level. At most, it would only be able to nourish the spirit, and the effect would be greatly reduced. Moreover, their understanding of the spiritual knowledge fruit was limited to hearsay. They didn't know what would happen after the spiritual knowledge fruit was split in two. What if it was directly crippled? That was not impossible. At that time, who could they find to cry to? It wasn't that Chu Tianliang didn't understand this principle, but it was rare for him to encounter the legendary spiritual knowledge fruit. He didn't want to give up just like that. He rolled his eyes and said, I can ask my father to prepare some more spiritual jades. Uncle Wenxiang only needs to give me half. No, a small half will do. A spiritual knowledge fruit could easily raise the spirit level of a gold core stage expert, even a Yuanying stage old monster. Moreover, he was currently only at the peak of foundation building late stage. Maybe he would only need a small half to raise one level. For this, spending a few hundred spiritual jades would be worth it. The spiritual knowledge fruit is mine. There's no room for discussion. In the future, if we find other treasures of heaven and earth, I can give them to you. Chu Wenxiang didn't back down. His aptitude wasn't high, and he had been stuck in the early gold core stage for many years. If he didn't have a fortuitous encounter, it was very likely that he would stop here for the rest of his life. At present, this spiritual knowledge fruit was almost the only hope for him to advance a level. How could he just let it go? Chu Tianliang didn't speak again, but from his expression, it could be seen that he didn't want to let it go. Leni looked at this scene from afar and found it somewhat funny. At this moment, the spiritual knowledge fruit was still in Chu Tianlu's arms, but these two people were already about to tear each other apart, completely unaware of the approaching danger. The confrontation continued. Although Chu Wenxiang had made up his mind to monopolize the spiritual knowledge fruit, he couldn't completely ignore Chu Tianliang. After all, the position of the father and son in the Chu family was really not small. If they really fell out because of this, even if he could rely on the spiritual knowledge fruit to raise his strength by a level, his future days would be very difficult. At present, the best way was to show a tough attitude and make Chu Tianliang retreat in the face of difficulties. At worst, he would give some concessions in other aspects as compensation. However, at this moment a strange change occurred. The ground under Chu Tianlu's feet suddenly trembled, and the layers of shadow tentacles covering his body actually began to show signs of collapse. In the blink of an eye, Chu Tianlu broke free and regained his freedom. Chapter 54:15. No matter how surprised Chu Wenshang was, the reality was that Chu Tianlu had indeed broken free from his shadow bind. Moreover, he had taken out the spirit knowledge fruit from his bosom and was about to stuff it into his mouth. Madman! Chu Wenshang was shocked. The spirit knowledge fruit was not poison, but the more powerful the effect of a heavenly treasure, the more thorough preparation was needed before taking it. Otherwise, it would be worse than poison. Not to mention that the entire process of taking it was a huge fatal flaw. It was not impossible for him to die on the spot. With no time to think, Chu Wenshang hurriedly used the shadow stick step again. This was the only method he could use to stop his opponent. According to common sense, the shadow stick step could not be used directly. Firstly, the conditions for shadows might not be met. Secondly, even if there were enough shadows, the traces would be too obvious. If he were to rashly send himself in front of the enemy, he might accidentally bump into the muzzle of a gun. If it were not for the fact that his strength was much higher than his opponent's, Chu Wenshang would never take such a risk. He was not a person who liked to take risks. He only reacted like this because he was determined to obtain the spirit knowledge fruit. Unexpectedly, Chu Tianlu was already prepared for this. His action of eating the spirit knowledge fruit just now was simply a pretense. Unless water had entered his brain, he would have forcefully eaten the spirit knowledge fruit under the watchful eyes of Chu Wenshang and Chu Tianliang. His action was to lure the other party to take the bait. As soon as Chu Wenshang used the shadow stick step, Chu Tianlu took the initiative to move. His target was not Chu Wenshang, but Chu Tianliang from beginning to end. He knew very well that it was impossible for him to be Chu Wenshang's opponent. In the moment he was trapped by the shadow bind, he already understood that his only chance of survival was to kill Chu Tianliang. Judging from the situation just now, Chu Wenshang and Chu Tianliang were not completely of one mind. When Chu Tianliang was really killed, after weighing the pros and cons, Chu Wenshang might not continue to target him. Only now did he react. In Lin Yi's eyes, Chu Tianlu's slow reaction had reached a certain realm. However, it was still much better than dying unaware. Besides, although Chu Tianlu's intelligence and talent were far from outstanding, there was one thing about him, and that was that he was very daring. To be more precise, it should be his ability to execute. Once he made a decision, he would press forward courageously. Just like at this moment, when he charged towards Chu Tianliang, it was as if he didn't care for his life at all. The strength in his entire body was concentrated on the tip of his blade, and he didn't hesitate to abandon his own defense. Everything he did was for the sake of killing Chu Tianliang with a single strike. It should be known that he had not completely gotten rid of Chu Wenshang at this time. He had only caught the other party off guard. Chu Wenshang was just as desperate as him. Relying on the strength of the early stage of Gold Core Realm, it was completely possible for him to catch up. Moreover, he had used the shadow sticking step head-on, taking the same risk as Chu Wenshang. Moreover, the difference in strength between him and Chu Tianliang was far from the insurmountable chasm that existed between him and Chu Wenshang. The two of them were only a minor level apart. As long as he was aware of the other party's intentions and made preparations in an instant, it was completely possible for him to counterattack and kill Chu Tianlu. Chu Tianlu was clearer than anyone about the risks involved, but he couldn't care less. In today's situation, if Chu Tianliang didn't die, then he would. There was no longer the slightest possibility for the two of them to coexist. In the blink of an eye, Chu Tianlu was only a step away from Chu Tianliang. The short blade in his hand was just about to touch his opponent's throat again, when a dark whistle suddenly came from behind him. Chu Tianlu's scalp immediately went numb. This sound was too familiar. He didn't need to turn around to know that it was definitely one of the Chu family's strongest shadow martial techniques, the shadow arrow. Chu Wenshang had been thrown off by him, and the fastest shadow sticking step, apart from various harsh conditions, also needed to accumulate power. This was a hard limit. Even a gold core expert could at most shorten this time. They couldn't completely erase it, and naturally couldn't use it continuously. However, just because Chu Wenshang couldn't catch up to him didn't mean that he could rest easy. A long-distance shadow arrow was enough to take his little life. The speed of the shadow arrow was extremely fast. Practically at the same time Chu Wenshang raised his hand, the shadow arrow had already caught up to Chu Tianlu, who was 30 meters away. If Chu Tianlu hadn't sensed it ahead of time and forcefully shifted his position by half a step, then his throat would have been directly pierced. In the end, the shadow arrow entered Chu Tianlu's right shoulder, disappearing into thin air. However, it left behind an extremely bloody and enormous wound, a ghastly sight to behold. When Chu Wenshang saw this, he furrowed his brows. Although he had been tricked by Chu Tianlu just now, relying on the shadow arrow, his trump card, he actually didn't panic in the slightest. He had always been confident that as long as he was willing, he could take Chu Tianlu's life at any time, and it would be as easy as turning over his palm. However, the scene before his eyes greatly exceeded his expectations. It wasn't strange that Chu Tianlu would be on guard against his shadow arrow, and it wasn't strange that he would shift his position by half a step in advance. However, this guy's right shoulder clearly had such a sinister bloody hole blasted open, and in the eyes of outsiders, his entire right arm seemed like it was about to fall off. At this moment, he unexpectedly didn't fall, and instead didn't move in the slightest. How was this possible? How could he withstand the powerful impact of the shadow arrow? After a moment of stupefaction, Chu Wenshang finally noticed a faint layer of texture between the opponent's limbs. At first glance, it seemed like some kind of extremely fine black line was used to form a complex and profound pattern. But upon closer inspection, he discovered that it wasn't a black line at all, but rather a shadow. Exchanging shadow for bones. Chu Wenshang was so shocked that he blurted out. As the name suggested, it was to replace the joints with a shadow for a short period of time. In this way, it was almost like half a shadow. Unless the source of the shadow could be directly eliminated, it was almost impossible to destroy it, because the shadow could not be broken. Of course, the damage from the shadow arrow just now was genuine. The only use of exchanging shadow for bones was to allow one to maintain sufficient mobility, even when they were heavily injured. It didn't matter even if their joints were blasted into smithereens, unless the time limit was over. In the Chu clan's shadow system, this was definitely an unorthodox martial skill, even more so than the immovable shadow. At the very least, there were still people who cultivated a movable shadow, but exchanging shadow for bones was practically lost. According to Chu Wenshang's knowledge, even the current clan head, who had already become a nascent soul-old monster, didn't know of it. It was only recorded in the Chu clan's secret martial skill manuals. The reason for this wasn't that exchanging shadow for bones wasn't valuable enough in actual combat. On the contrary, its value in actual combat was very high, at the very least far above that of a movable shadow. The problem was that this martial skill was just too difficult to comprehend. Looking at all of the Chu clan's ancestors, the number of people who could truly comprehend its essence could be counted on one's fingers. In addition, its actual combat effectiveness was far inferior to other offensive and defensive martial skills like shadow arrow, so naturally no one was interested in it. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.